For thousands of years, they ruled the skies, creatures of fire and death, so powerful that kingdoms bent the knee at the mere shadow of their wings. They melted castles into rivers of stone. They burned armies by the thousands. They were gods made flesh. And then they vanished. But here is what the legends never tell you. In a throne room covered in ash and blood, the last dragon in the world stood before the symbol of absolute power, the Iron Throne. Forged by dragon fire 300 years ago, it had corrupted every soul who sat upon it. And now, cradled in the dragon's claws was the body of the woman he loved, his mother, his queen, the woman who had just burned a city of innocence to ash. What happened next would echo through history. The dragon opened his jaws and fire erupted, but not at the man who had killed her. No, at something far more symbolic. We will return to this moment, but to understand why the last dragon made this choice, we must go back. Back before the Iron Throne existed, back before Westeros was united, back 5,000 years to a land of volcanoes and blood magic, where dragons were not myths, but weapons of conquest. This is the complete history of every dragon in Game of Thrones, from the ancient freehold of Valyria to the death of Daenerys Targaryen. We will cover over 30 dragons by name. We will witness 2 extinctions and 1 impossible rebirth. We will see dragons build the greatest dynasty Westeros ever knew, and we will watch them tear it apart in civil war. You will learn how 3 dragons conquered 7 kingdoms, how 20 dragons destroyed each other in the most brutal war ever fought, how the last dragons died out, and why nobody could bring them back for over 150 years. And finally, how 3 eggs turned to stone became 3 living weapons that would save the world from an army of the dead, only to burn the greatest city in Westeros to the ground. This video is over 3 hours long, because dragon history is not simple. Every dragon has a story, every rider has a fate, and every death has consequences that ripple through centuries. I have organized this chronologically, so you can follow the complete timeline from beginning to end. But I recommend you experience this as one complete journey, because the story of dragons is the story of power itself, and power, as we will see, always comes with a price. So let us begin 5,000 years ago, in a civilization that would make Westeros look like a farming village, a place where 40 families rode dragons and ruled an empire that stretched across continents, a place of sorcery and slavery, of fire and blood. A place called Valyria. 5,000 years before the events of Game of Thrones, on the eastern continent of Essos, there rose a civilization unlike any the world had ever seen. The Valyrian freehold, an empire built not on steel or gold, but on the backs of dragons. The Valyrians did not just tame dragons, they became one with them. Through blood magic and ancient rituals lost to time, they forged bonds with these creatures that went beyond mere training. A Valyrian dragon lord and his dragon were 2 parts of one weapon. The dragon breathed fire hot enough to melt stone. The rider provided direction and purpose. Together they were unstoppable. But where did the dragons come from? The answer lies in a place called the 14 Flames, a chain of volcanoes on the Valyrian peninsula, always smoking, always burning. It was here, in the heart of fire and ash, that dragons were discovered. Whether they evolved naturally in this extreme environment, or whether the Valyrians created them through dark sorcery, no one knows for certain. The Valyrians kept their secrets well, and when Valyria fell, those secrets died with it. What we do know is this. The Valyrians learned to hatch dragon eggs using a combination of fire and blood magic. They learned to bond with hatchlings from birth. They learned commands in the ancient tongue of High Valyrian that dragons would obey. And most importantly, They learned that only those with Valyrian blood could ride dragons and survive. This created a ruling class unlike any other. 40 noble families, each with dragons, each with power beyond imagination. They called themselves Dragon Lords, and they used their dragons to build an empire. The Valyrian freehold stretched from the Smoking Sea to Slaver's Bay. Everywhere the dragons flew, resistance crumbled. What king would face a creature that could burn his army to ash in minutes? What castle walls could stand against fire hot enough to melt stone? The Valyrians conquered nation after nation not through long campaigns, but through terror. One dragon could end a war before it began. They used their dragons for more than war. The volcanic mines of Valyria produced metals and gems that made the freehold unimaginably wealthy. But mining deep into volcanic rock was dangerous, even deadly. So the Valyrians used dragons. Dragon fire could cut through solid rock like butter, tunnels that would take men months to dig. A dragon could bore in hours. Of course, no dragon lord would risk himself in the mines. That work was done by slaves. Hundreds of thousands of slaves worked to death in the darkness, while dragons carved paths through the earth above them. This was the reality of Valyria, magnificent and monstrous, beautiful and brutal, the greatest civilization ever built, and the cruelest. And among the 40 Dragon Lord families, one was considered minor, not the most powerful, not the richest, not the most ambitious. They controlled the westernmost outpost of the empire, a gloomy island fortress in the narrow sea called Dragonstone. Their name was Targaryen. The Targaryens kept dragons like all the great families. They bred them, they rode them, they used them to maintain control over their corner of the empire. But they were not players in the grand politics of the freehold. They were distant, isolated, content with their volcanic island and the small holdings they controlled. Until one of them had a dream. Her name was Daenys Targaryen, and history would remember her as Daenys the Dreamer. She was young, barely a woman, when the visions began, dreams of fire and destruction, dreams of the 14 flames erupting all at once, dreams of Valyria sinking into the sea, taking every dragon lord, every slave and citizen down into molten rock and boiling water, dreams of the end of the world. She told her father, Lord Aenor Targaryen, and unlike most fathers throughout history who dismissed their children's nightmares, Aenor believed her. Perhaps he had dreams of his own, perhaps he saw signs others missed, or perhaps he simply loved his daughter and trusted her gift. Whatever the reason, Aenor Targaryen made a decision that would change the fate of Westeros forever. He abandoned Valyria. 12 years before the Doom, House Targaryen packed everything they owned, took their 5 dragons, and fled to Dragonstone. Their fellow dragon lords mocked them, called them cowards, called them mad. How could anyone abandon the greatest civilization in the world over a girl's dream? But Daenys was right. In the year 102 before Aegon's conquest, the 14 flames erupted simultaneously in a cataclysm that shattered the Valyrian peninsula. Earthquakes tore the land apart. Volcanoes exploded with force beyond imagining. The seas boiled. The skies turned black. And in one single day and night, the Valyrian freehold was destroyed. Every dragon lord died. Every dragon perished in the flames or drowned in the boiling seas. The Smoking Sea, they call it now. A place where the water still bubbles with volcanic heat 400 years later. A place where sailors report seeing the ruins of towers beneath the waves and hearing the screams of the dead on the wind. A place no sane man goes. The doom of Valyria ended the age of dragons, except for 5. The 5 dragons of House Targaryen safe on Dragonstone, isolated in the narrow sea far from the destruction. They were the last dragons in the world, and the Targaryens were the last dragon lords. For a century, House Targaryen remained on Dragonstone. They bred their dragons carefully. They maintained the old rituals. They kept the knowledge of dragon handling alive, but they did not expand. They did not conquer. They simply survived, watching the world from their volcanic island while the free cities of Essos squabbled over the scraps of the Valyrian Empire. To the west lay Westeros, 7 independent kingdoms, constantly at war with each other. The kingdom of the north under House Stark, the kingdom of the mountain and vale under House Arryn, the kingdom of the isles and rivers under House Hoa, the kingdom of the rock under House Lannister, the kingdom of the Reach under House Gardner, the Storm Kingdom under House Durrandon, and the kingdom of Dorne under House Martell. 7 kings, 7 kingdoms, no unity, endless war. The Targaryens watched and waited. Their dragons grew. Balerion, born in Valyria before the Doom, grew massive. Valyria and Meraxes, born on Dragonstone, grew powerful, and a new generation of Targaryens grew ambitious. One in particular. His name was Aegon. History would call him Aegon the Conqueror, and he looked at the 7 kingdoms of Westeros and saw not 7 kings but 7 future subjects. He had 3 dragons. He had 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, both dragon riders. He had a small army, and he had a vision. 1 realm, 1 king, united under the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. In the year 2 before the conquest became year 1 of Aegon's reign, he landed on the eastern coast of Westeros with fewer than 3,000 men. The lords of Westeros laughed. 3,000 men against the combined armies of 7 kingdoms. It was suicide. But Aegon did not bring 3,000 men to conquer Westeros. He brought 3 dragons, and everything changed. Aegon Targaryen stood on the hill where he would build his capital and made a declaration. He was not here to negotiate. He was not here to make alliances. He sent ravens to every king in Westeros with the same message: bend the knee or burn. Most of them chose to fight. Aegon had 3 dragons, and each was a nightmare made flesh. The largest was Balerion, and men who saw him said the sky turned black when he flew overhead. His scales were black as midnight. His eyes glowed red like coals in a forge. His teeth were swords. His claws were spears. When he opened his jaws, the fire that came out was not orange or yellow. It was black at the edges, so hot it seemed to swallow light itself. Balerion was already over 100 years old when the conquest began. Born in Valyria before the Doom, he had lived through the cataclysm and grown larger every year since. By the time Aegon rode him into battle, Valerion's wingspan was so vast that entire armies would stand in his shadow. His roar could be heard for miles, and his fire could melt stone and steel like candle wax. Aegon rode Balerion into every major battle of the conquest. Man and dragon moved as one. Where Aegon pointed, Balerion burned, and what Balerion burned did not rise again. The second dragon was Vhagar, ridden by Aegon's sister wife Visenya. Vhagar was female, though with dragons gender was always a strange thing. She was smaller than Balerion, but not by much. Her scales were bronze-green with highlights that caught the sun like metal. Her temperament was fierce. She did not simply kill her enemies, she tore them apart. Visenya was a warrior, hard and cold, and Vhagar matched her perfectly. Together, they were brutality, given wings. The third dragon was Meraxes, ridden by Aegon's other sister wife Rhaenys. Where Vhagar was bronze and brutal, Meraxes was silver and graceful. Her scales shimmered like moonlight on water. Her eyes were gold. She was the smallest of the 3, but still massive beyond anything Westeros had ever seen. Rhaenys loved her people and loved her dragon, and Meraxes reflected that. She burned when commanded, but seemed almost reluctant, as if she understood the difference between soldiers and innocents. That mercy would be her death. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First came the conquest itself, and the conquest came fast. The first kingdom to face the dragons was the Stormlands. King Argilac the Arrogant refused to bend the knee. He met Aegon in open battle with his entire army. Thunder rolled across the Storm Coast as the two forces met. Argilac was a legendary warrior. His men were hardened by generations of war. They formed shield walls and prepared to fight. Then Balerion flew overhead, and everything became fire. Aegon did not even need his sisters. Balerion alone broke the army in minutes. Men scattered, shields melted. Argilac died in the chaos. The Stormlands fell in a single afternoon. The other kings took notice, but they did not unite. That was their mistake. Each thought they could defeat Aegon alone. Each thought their castles, their armies, their strategies would be enough. They were wrong. The King of the Reach, Mern Gardner, joined forces with King Loren Lannister of the Rock. Together they gathered the largest army Westeros had ever seen. 55,000 men, knights in shining armor, pikemen, archers, the finest soldiers gold could buy. They met Aegon's small force on a field south of the Blackwater. The place would be called the Field of Fire, and the name is horribly accurate. Aegon had brought all 3 dragons. The battle began normally. Aegon's 3,000 men formed lines. The massive enemy army advanced. Victory seemed certain for the kings. Then Aegon gave the signal. All 3 dragons attacked at once. Balerion from the center, Vhagar from the left, Meraxes from the right. Imagine standing in that army. You are surrounded by 50,000 of your fellow soldiers. You feel safe in numbers. Then you hear a sound like thunder. You look up and see 3 shadows blotting out the sun. You have one moment to realize what is about to happen. Then the world becomes fire. 4,000 men burned alive in less than an hour. The smell of burning flesh carried for miles. Knights cooked inside their armor. Horses stamped it in flames. Men jumped into the river to escape and drowned because their melting armor dragged them under. King Mern and his entire line, every son, every grandson died in the flames. The Gardner dynasty ended in a single afternoon. King Loren Lannister survived by fleeing early. He bent the knee the next day. The other kings heard what happened at the Field of Fire and had to make a choice: fight dragons and die, or kneel and live. Torrhen Stark, king in the north, marched south with 30,000 men. He reached the Trident and made camp. Across the river he could see Aegon's much smaller force. Torrhen was not a fool. He knew he could win a conventional battle. But then his scouts reported what they saw in Aegon's camp. 3 dragons, resting, waiting. Torrhen Stark thought about what happened at the Field of Fire. He thought about his 30,000 men burning. He thought about the north without a leader, without an army, defenseless. He made his decision. He crossed the river alone. He knelt before Aegon. He surrendered his crown. His men, ready for battle, watched their king bow to a foreign invader without a single sword being drawn. They called him Torrhen, the king who knelt. Some called him a coward, but the North remembers, and what the North remembers is that Torrhen Stark saved 30,000 lives that day. He chose wisdom over pride. Not every king was so wise. Balerion the Black, king of the Isles and Rivers, had just finished building the greatest castle ever constructed, Harrenhal. 40 years in the making. Towers so tall they scraped the clouds, walls so thick no siege engine could break them. Balerion declared his castle impregnable. He would wait inside while Aegon wasted his army trying to break through. Aegon did not try to break through. He simply flew over the walls on Balerion and burned Harren and his sons alive inside their own castle. Dragonfire does not care about thick walls. It pours through windows. It flows down stairways. It fills rooms with heat so intense that stone cracks and people cook from the inside. Harren and his sons died screaming. Harren Hall still stands today, but its towers are melted and cracked, a monument to the futility of walls against dragons. One by one, the kingdoms fell. The Aryans in the Vale bent the knee when Visenya flew Vhagar up to the Eyrie. The castle was considered unreachable, built on a mountain, accessible only by a treacherous path. Visenya landed in the courtyard and asked the young king if he wanted to fly. He was 6 years old. His mother bent the knee. Within 2 years, 6 of the 7 kingdoms had submitted. Aegon controlled everything from the Wall to the Red Mountains of Dawn. He built his capital where he first landed, a city that would grow into King's Landing, and he had his throne forged. The Iron Throne, made from the swords of his defeated enemies. 1,000 blades melted together with dragonfire, specifically Balerion's fire. It took 59 days to forge. The throne was deliberately uncomfortable, jagged, sharp. Aegon said that a king should never sit easy. Every ruler who sat the Iron Throne risked being cut by the blades. They called it the price of power. But one kingdom still resisted, Dorne. The Dornish did not fight like the other kingdoms. They did not meet dragons in open battle. They knew that was suicide. Instead, they used guerrilla warfare, ambushes, raids, scorched earth. Whenever the Targaryens invaded, the Dornish melted into the deserts and mountains. They offered no targets, no armies to burn, no castles to siege. For years this continued, small skirmishes, frustration. The dragons could burn villages, but the people were gone before they arrived. Aegon could not conquer an enemy he could not find. Then 10 years into his reign, tragedy struck. Rhaenys flew Merexes into Dorne on another campaign. This time, the Dornish were ready. They had been studying dragons for a decade. They had been building weapons, giant crossbows called scorpions, powerful enough to shoot bolts through dragon scales. They set a trap. Meraxes flew over a castle called Hellholt. Hidden scorpions fired from multiple directions. One bolt, larger than a spear, shot through the sky and struck Meraxes directly through her eye. The dragon screamed and fell from the sky. She crashed into the castle courtyard. Rhaenys was crushed beneath her own dragon. The queen was dead. One of the 3 conquerors was gone, and Westeros learned something terrifying. Dragons could be killed. Aegon's grief turned to rage. He burned every Dornish castle he could find, but the Dornish still would not submit. The war dragged on. Finally, Aegon accepted reality. He could not conquer Dorne, not without losing everything he had gained. He withdrew. Dorne remained independent for another 150 years. They joined the 7 kingdoms not through conquest but through marriage and diplomacy. But that is a story for later. For now, Aegon had done what no one thought possible. He had united 6 kingdoms under one crown. He established a dynasty that would rule for 300 years, and he had proven that dragons were the ultimate weapon of war. The Targaryen reign had begun, and for the next 150 years, as long as the dragons lived, no one could challenge their power. The dragons had built an empire. Soon, they would tear it apart. Aegon's conquest united the kingdoms, but it was the dragons born afterward that truly secured Targaryen power. Within a century, the number of dragons grew from 3 to nearly 20. Dragonstone became a breeding ground. The volcanic heat provided the perfect environment for eggs to hatch, and the Targaryens, carrying the last remnants of Valyrian blood magic, ensured the tradition survived. But more dragons meant more riders, and more riders meant more ambition, more conflict, more tragedy. Let us speak of the dragons that shaped the century after Aegon's death. Each one a unique creature, each one bonded to a Targaryen who would shape history. Balerion outlived his first rider. After Aegon died peacefully in his sleep, the Black Dread was claimed by his son Maega. Maega the Cruel, they called him, a king so brutal that his own mother turned against him. Maega used Balerion to enforce his will through terror. He burned the Sept of Remembrance with all the most devout inside because they opposed him. He burned lords who questioned him. He burned anyone who resisted. But even Maega could not live forever. When he died, mysteriously found dead on the Iron Throne, with blood dripping from the blades, Balerion passed to young King Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys was everything Maega was not: wise, just peaceful. He rarely used Balerion for war. Instead, he used the dragon's presence to maintain order. Just seeing Balerion was enough. The great beast was so massive by now that his shadow could cover entire towns. Balerion lived to be over 200 years old. By the end he was too large to hunt properly, too old to fly far. He spent his final years resting in the dragon pit, a living legend. When he finally died during the reign of Jaehaerys, the king ordered his skull preserved. It was placed in the throne room beneath the Red Keep, as a reminder. This is the power that built our dynasty. This is what happens when you challenge us. Even in death, Balerion was a weapon. Vhagar survived her rider Visenya and lived on for decades. After Visenya's death, Vhagar was claimed by Lyanna Velaryon, a dragon rider of House Velaryon, who married Prince Daemon Targaryen. Lyanna loved flying more than anything. She would take Vhagar across the narrow sea, soaring over Pentos and Volantis, free as the wind. When Lyanna died in childbirth, knowing she was doomed, she dragged herself from her bed and commanded Vhagar to burn her. She chose a dragon rider's death over the pain of labor. Vhagar obeyed, though witnesses said the dragon seemed to mourn. After Lyanna, Vhagar was claimed by Aemon Targaryen, a prince who lost an eye as a child. Aemon was dangerous, brilliant but unstable, and Vhagar by this time was the largest living dragon in the world, nearly as large as Balerion had been. The two of them together would play a crucial role in the civil war to come, but we will return to that. New dragons were born and bonded throughout the peaceful years. During the reign of King Jaehaerys, called the Conciliator, two dragons became symbols of his long and prosperous rule. Vermithor the Bronze Fury. Jaehaerys bonded with Vermithor when both were young. For 55 years king and dragon were inseparable. Vermithor's scales were bronze, his wings tan like leather. He grew massive during Jaehaerys' long reign, second in size only to Vhagar. When Jaehaerys finally died as an old man, Vermithor was left without a rider. The dragon retreated to a lair on Dragonstone, refusing to bond with anyone else. He remained wild and dangerous, a bronze shadow in the volcanic caves, waiting. Silverwing was ridden by Queen Elisane, Jaehaerys' sister wife. Where Vermithor was fierce, Silverwing was gentle. Her silver scales caught the moonlight like jewelry. She was known for her calm temperament. Elisane would fly Silverwing across the realm, visiting small villages and listening to common people's problems. The small folk loved the queen and her silver dragon. When Elisane died, Silverwing also refused to bond. She too retreated to Dragonstone, sometimes flying alongside Vermithor, two ancient dragons, mourning their riders in their own way. Then, there was Caraxes, the bloodworm. Everything about Caraxes was wrong in the most fascinating way. His body was longer and more serpentine than other dragons. He looked almost like a massive red snake with wings. His neck stretched impossibly long. His roar sounded different, more like a scream than a growl. But what made Caraxes truly terrifying was his aggression. Caraxes was claimed by Prince Daemon Targaryen, brother to King Viserys. If ever a dragon matched its rider perfectly, It was these two. Daemon was the rogue prince, ambitious, dangerous, charismatic, unpredictable. He had been married twice, killed in tournaments for sport, and openly coveted the throne. Caraxes matched his energy. The dragon was vicious in combat, attacking with a fury that terrified even other dragons. Together, Daemon and Caraxes were the most dangerous combination in the realm. Meleys the Red Queen was claimed by Princess Rhaenys, granddaughter of Jaehaerys. Rhaenys should have been queen. She was the eldest grandchild. She was brilliant, beloved, and more than capable, but the realm chose her younger cousin Viserys instead, because he was male. They called her the queen who never was. The title was meant to be cruel, but Rhaenys wore it with pride. She had Meleys, a dragon with scarlet scales that shone like rubies. Meleys was one of the fastest dragons alive. In the sky, nothing could catch her. Rhaenys and Meleys became symbols of what could have been. A queen and her dragon, denied their birthright. During the reign of King Viserys, more dragons hatched and bonded. His daughter Rhaenyra claimed Syrax, a she-dragon with golden yellow scales. Syrax was named after a Valyrian goddess of fertility. The dragon was beautiful, but had never seen real combat. Rhaenyra raised her children around dragons, ensuring each would have a mount. Her eldest, Jaehaerys, bonded with Vermax, a dragon with green and copper scales. Young and eager, Vermax responded quickly to commands. Lucerys, the second son, claimed Arrax, even younger than Vermax, with gold and peach coloring. Arrax was small, still growing, barely large enough to carry a rider. The youngest, Joffrey, had Tyraxes, a dragon barely more than a hatchling. Rhaenyra's daughter Baela claimed Moondancer, a slender dragon with pale green scales and pearl highlights. Moondancer was graceful and fast, perfect for Baela's bold personality. King Viserys remarried after his first wife died. His new wife Alicent Hightower gave him more children, each claimed a dragon. Haegon the Elder bonded with Sunfire, and those who saw Sunfire said he was the most beautiful dragon ever born. His scales were gold that sparkled in the sun. His wing membranes were pale pink. He looked like a living jewel. When Sunfire flew on a clear day, people would stop and stare, beauty incarnate. Helena, Aegon's sister wife, claimed Dreamfire. Dreamfire was an older dragon who had been ridden before. Her scales were pale blue with silver highlights. She was known for being docile, spending more time sleeping than flying. Perfect for Helena, who was gentle and strange, more interested in insects than politics. The youngest son, Aemond, had no dragon at first. This ate at him. All his siblings had dragons. Even his nephews, whose legitimacy was questioned, had dragons. Aemond was mocked, called weak. One night, he snuck into Dragonstone and approached Vhagar. The ancient dragon, massive and temperamental, could have killed him instantly. Instead, she accepted him. At 10 years old, Aemond claimed the largest dragon in the world. The power went to his head immediately. Daeron, sent away to Oldtown, claimed Tessarion, called the Blue Queen for her cobalt scales. Tessarion was young but fierce, with copper wing membranes that flashed in the sun. Beyond the royal family, House Balerion had dragons through their Targaryen blood. Laenor Velaryon rode Seasmoke, a pale grey dragon with silver highlights. After Laenor's apparent death, Seasmoke would refuse another rider for years, proving the depth of dragon bonds. And then there were the wild dragons of Dragonstone, dragons that had never been claimed, that lived in the volcanic caves and hunted in the surrounding seas. The Cannibal, a massive black dragon with green eyes that literally ate other dragons. He would raid nests, devouring eggs and hatchlings. No one had ever successfully claimed him. Anyone who tried was found dead, burned to ash, or simply disappeared. The cannibal was older than any living dragon except possibly Veigar, where he came from. No one knew. Some said he predated the Targaryens' arrival on Dragonstone. He was rage and hunger given form. Sheepstealer, a mud-brown dragon who raided local farms for sheep, smaller than the cannibal, but just as wild, aggressive toward humans. Farmers hated him. For years he resisted any attempt at taming. Grey Ghost, pale grey like morning mist, shy and reclusive. He avoided humans entirely, living on fish and prey caught far from civilization, silent, ghostly, beautiful in his isolation. By the time King Viserys lay dying, there were nearly 20 dragons alive. The most dragons since the doom of Valyria 400 years ago. The Targaryen dynasty had never been stronger. The dragons had multiplied, the family had grown, peace had reigned for decades. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The king had made a choice that would divide the realm. He had named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, breaking centuries of tradition that favored male succession. Half the realm supported her claim. Half supported her younger half-brother Aegon. Both sides had dragons. This was the problem with having so many in Aegon's time. Only the ruling family had dragons, and they were united. Now, dragons were spread across multiple branches of House Targaryen. Cousins had dragons, siblings had dragons, and those siblings hated each other. When King Viserys finally died, the realm split. Rhaenyra claimed the throne. Aegon claimed the throne. Their supporters rallied to each side. Armies marched, alliances formed, betrayals began. And for the first time since the doom of Valyria, dragon would fight dragon. They called it the Dance of the Dragons. But it was not a dance. It was mutual annihilation. It was the beginning of the end for dragons in Westeros. Within 2 years, nearly every dragon in the world would be dead. The question was not whether dragons would survive the war. The question was whether anyone would survive the dragons. Before we dive into the war that would kill most of the dragons, we need to understand the creatures that lived outside Targaryen control. Because when the Dance of the Dragons began and both sides became desperate for more riders, these wild dragons would become the difference between victory and defeat. They were dangerous, unpredictable. Some had never known a human's touch. Others had outlived their riders and gone feral, and claiming one meant a very real chance of death. The cannibal was the most feared dragon on Dragonstone, and possibly the most mysterious creature in all of dragon history. Massive, completely black with eyes like green fire. His scales were harder than any other dragon's, scarred from decades of combat with other dragons, because that was what the cannibal did. He hunted other dragons. Dragon eggs disappeared from the breeding caves. Hatchlings vanished in the night. Younger dragons were found torn apart, half-eaten. The cannibal would lurk in the volcanic peaks of Dragonstone, watching, waiting. When a dragon flew too close to his territory, he attacked without warning. He was faster than his size suggested, brutal, efficient. No one knew how old he was. Some Meisters claimed he predated House Targaryen's arrival on Dragonstone, that he had lived on the island for over 100 years. If true, that made him potentially older than Balerion had been. But there was no way to confirm this. The cannibal allowed no one close enough to study him. Many tried to claim him over the years. Ambitious dragon seeds with Targaryen bastard blood. Younger sons seeking glory. Fools who thought they could bond with the unbondable. The cannibal killed them all. Sometimes he burned them. Sometimes he ate them. Sometimes their bodies were simply never found. During the dance, both sides considered trying to claim the cannibal. Both sides decided it was suicide. The dragon remained wild, untamed. A reminder that not all dragons bent to human will. After the war ended, the cannibal disappeared. Some say he flew to the volcanic ruins of Valyria. Others say he still lurks in the mountains of Dragonstone, ancient and angry, waiting for the world to forget him so he can hunt in peace. Sheepstealer was smaller than the cannibal, but no less wild. His scales were a muddy brown color, ugly compared to the gleaming dragons of the Targaryens. He got his name from his diet. While other dragons hunted fish or wild game, Sheepstealer raided the farms around Dragonstone. He would swoop down at dawn, snatch a sheep, and vanish before the farmers could react. This made him hated by the small folk. They lost livestock. They lost income. They complained to the Targaryens, but nothing was done. How do you stop a dragon from hunting? You can't fence in the sky. Sheepstealer was aggressive toward humans. He had no reason to trust them. When the Targaryens tried to claim him in earlier generations, he fought back, burned several would-be riders, became more suspicious and dangerous. By the time of the dance, he was considered untamable. But someone did tame him, a girl named Nettles. Nettles was not noble. She was a small folk girl, possibly a dragon seed, possibly not. No one was certain she had Targaryen blood at all. But she was clever. She knew the Targaryens were offering wealth and position to anyone who could claim a dragon. She chose Sheepstealer because no one else wanted him. Instead of approaching him like a dragon lord, commanding and expecting obedience, Nettles used patience. Every day for weeks, she brought a freshly killed sheep to the dragon's lair. She left it at a distance. She backed away. She let him eat. She never tried to touch him, never tried to force a bond. Slowly, Sheepstealer began to trust her. The sheep kept coming. The girl never threatened. Eventually he allowed her closer, then closer. Finally she touched his scales, and the bond formed. Nettles proved something revolutionary. Dragon claiming was not just about blood. It was about respect, understanding, patience. She rode Sheepstealer into battle during the dance and survived the entire war. Afterward she flew east and was never seen again. Sheepstealer, the ugly brown dragon no one wanted, carried his rider to freedom, while the noble dragons died in the war. Grey Ghost was the opposite of the cannibal. Where the cannibal was aggressive and territorial, Grey Ghost was shy and reclusive. His scales were pale gray, almost white, making him nearly invisible against cloudy skies. He lived on the eastern shore of Dragonstone, far from the castle and settlements. Grey Ghost hunted fish in the narrow sea and avoided all human contact. Even the small folk rarely saw him, just a pale shadow against the dawn sky. A ghost indeed. He never attacked livestock, never threatened anyone. He simply wanted to be left alone. During the dance, no one claimed Grey Ghost because no one could find him long enough to try. He was too good at hiding, too careful, but his isolation could not save him. When Sunfire, wounded and grounded on Dragonstone, grew hungry, he hunted Grey Ghost. The two dragons fought over the island's eastern coast. Sunfire was injured but larger and more experienced in combat. Grey Ghost had never fought another dragon. He tried to flee but Sunfire caught him. The beautiful golden dragon tore the grey one apart and fed on his corpse for days. It was a cruel end for a creature that had only wanted peace. But dragons are predators, and in war, even the peaceful cannot hide forever. Beyond Dragonstone, there were other dragons waiting for riders. Older dragons who had outlived their original partners. Vermithor had bonded with King Jaehaerys for over 50 years. When the old king died, Vermithor retreated into the volcanic caves beneath Dragonstone. He was ancient now, massive, second in size only to Viega. His bronze scales had dulled with age, but he was still powerful, still dangerous. For years, Vermithor remained alone. He allowed no one to approach. When servants brought him food, they left it at the entrance to his lair and fled. The Bronze Fury was mourning. Dragons feel grief, they understand loss, and Vermithor had lost the only rider he ever loved. When the dance began and Princess Rhaenyra needed more dragon riders, she made a desperate call. She summoned anyone with possible Targaryen blood, bastards from across the realm, dragon seeds. She offered them riches and legitimacy if they could claim a dragon. Many came, many tried, many died. Vermithor killed several who approached him. He was not interested in replacing Jaehaerys, but one man succeeded, Hugh Hammer, a blacksmith. Massive and strong, with silver hair that suggested Targaryen ancestry, Hugh approached Vermithor with confidence bordering on arrogance. Maybe that was what the dragon respected. Maybe he was simply tired of being alone. Whatever the reason, Vermithor accepted Hugh. Suddenly, the Blacks had the second largest dragon in the world on their side. Hugh Hammer rode Vermithor into battle, and the Bronze Fury proved he had lost none of his strength. But Hugh's ambition would lead to betrayal. We will return to that. Silverwing had been ridden by good Queen Alysanne. She was everything Vermithor was not: gentle, patient, beautiful. Her silver scales shone like mirrors in the sunlight. Even after Alysanne died, Silverwing remained friendly toward humans. She would allow people to approach, to touch her scales. She seemed to enjoy company. When the Dragon Seed program began, many tried to claim Silverwing because she seemed safest, but she rejected them all, until Ulf White, a man who claimed to be Targaryen bastard, though many doubted his heritage. Ulf was a drunk and a braggart, loud, obnoxious. Not the kind of person you would expect a dragon to choose. But Silverwing accepted him. Perhaps she was lonely. Perhaps she saw something in Ulf others missed. Or perhaps dragons have their own reasons that humans cannot understand. Whatever the cause, Ulf White rode Silverwing to war. Like Hugh, his loyalty would not last. Seasmoke was a pale gray dragon with silver highlights. He had been ridden by Lenor Balerion, husband to Princess Rhaenyra. When Lenor supposedly died, Seasmoke refused all other riders for years. The dragon mourned, grew aggressive, wounded several who tried to claim him. But during the dance, Seasmoke did something unprecedented. He chose his own rider. Adam of Hull, a bastard son of House Valyrian, was walking near the dragon's lair when Seasmoke approached him. Not aggressive, curious. The dragon lowered his head, allowed Adam to touch him, bonded with him. This had never happened before. Riders claimed dragons. Dragons did not claim riders. But Seasmoke had made his choice. Adam proved worthy. He remained loyal to Rhaenyra throughout the war and fought with honor. He and Seasmoke would die together in one of the final battles, loyal to the end. Then there were the young dragons, still growing, still learning, bonded to Rhaenyra's children. Vermax was ridden by Jaehaerys Velaryon, green and copper scales, young but brave. Vermax responded instantly to commands. Jace trained him for aerial combat, knowing war was coming. Boy and dragon practiced over the waters near Dragonstone, preparing for battles they hoped would never come. Arax belonged to Lucerys Velaryon, gold and peach-colored, smaller than his brother's dragon, still a juvenile. Arax was gentle for a dragon, loyal. He trusted Luke completely. That trust would lead to tragedy on a stormy night over Shipbreaker Bay. But that story comes soon. Tyraxes, Moondancer, Stormcloud, young dragons, barely old enough to ride, bonded to young Targaryens, barely old enough to understand the responsibility. They were not ready for war, but war does not wait for readiness. Finally, there were the unclaimed hatchlings, Shrikers, and Morgul, bonded to the young twins Jaehaera and Jaehaerys. These dragons were so young they could barely fly, still kept in the dragon pit, still being trained. They would never grow old enough to fight. Their story would end in fire, and screaming, killed by a mob that blamed dragons for all their suffering. This was the state of dragons when the dance began. 20 living dragons, some massive and ancient, some young and untested, some wild and dangerous, some gentle and trusting, each unique, each powerful. And within 2 years, nearly all of them would be dead, because humans had learned to ride dragons, to bond with them, to use them as weapons. But humans had never learned the most important lesson, that giving so many people so much power would inevitably lead to those powers destroying each other. The dance was not just a war, it was a mutual extinction event. Dragons killing dragons, riders killing riders. And when the fires finally died and the smoke cleared, the age of dragons would be over. Not because dragons were weak, but because the humans who rode them could not stop fighting each other long enough to see what they were destroying. King Viserys died in his sleep, and within hours the realm split in half. The king had spent his entire reign trying to prevent this exact moment. He had named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir when she was only 14, made the lords of Westeros swear oaths to support her claim, repeated those oaths throughout his life. He had been clear Rhaenyra would be queen. But Viserys had remarried. His second wife, Alicent Hightower, gave him sons, and in Westeros, tradition favored sons over daughters. Always, when Viserys died, Alicent and her father, the Hand of the King, moved quickly. They crowned her son Aegon before anyone could object. They imprisoned those who opposed them. They controlled King's Landing and the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra was on Dragonstone. When she heard the news, her father was dead. Her throne had been stolen. Her half-brother, who had never wanted to be king, was being paraded through the streets wearing her crown. She went into early labor from the shock and rage. The child was stillborn, deformed, a daughter that should have been. Rhaenyra held her dead baby and made a decision. She would take back what was hers, by fire and blood, if necessary. The realm divided along family lines. Those who supported Rhaenyra wore black in her honor. They called themselves the Blacks. Those who supported Aegon wore green, the color Alicent had worn when she declared her intentions years ago. They called themselves the Greens. Both sides began counting their strength. Armies, castles, gold, fleets, but most importantly, dragons. The Blacks held Dragonstone, which meant they controlled the breeding ground and the majority of dragons. Rhaenyra rode Syrax. Her husband Daemon commanded Caraxes. Her cousin Rhaenys had Meles. Her sons rode Vermax, Arax, and Tyraxes. Her stepdaughters had Moondancer, and waiting in the caves were the unclaimed giants, Vermithor, Silverwing, Seasmoke, the wild dragons. The Blacks counted their dragons and felt confident they had more, larger, better. The Greens held King's Landing and the legitimacy of the Iron Throne. King Aegon rode Sunfire. His brother Aebon commanded Vhagar, the largest dragon alive. His sister Helena had Dreamfire, though she would never fight. His brother Daderon, far south in Old Town, rode Tessarion. The Greens counted their dragons and felt confident, quality over quantity. Vhagar alone was worth 3 younger dragons. Both sides were wrong. Neither side would win. The only victor in the dance would be death itself. But before the killing began, there was a moment where peace was still possible. Rhaenyra sent her son Lucerys as an envoy to Storm's End. Luke was 14 years old, scared but trying to be brave. He flew on Arax through gathering storm clouds, carrying his mother's message to Lord Boros Baratheon. Support my claim. Remember your oath. When Luke arrived at Storm's End, he found Aemond Targaryen already there. Aemond, the prince who had claimed Vhagar. Aemond, who had lost an eye as a child in a fight with Luke and his brother. Aemond, who had never forgiven, never forgotten. Luke delivered his message. Lord Boros rejected it, refused to support Rhaenyra, told Luke to leave. The boy turned to go, relieved to escape, but Aemond called after him, stopped him, demanded payment for the eye. Luke had taken years ago, one of your eyes, right here, right now. Luke ran out of the castle, into the rain, onto Arrax. The small dragon launched into the storm with Ammon's laughter echoing behind them. Luke thought he had escaped. Then he heard the roar. Vega exploded from the clouds behind them. Massive, ancient, furious. Ammon was chasing them, shouting for Luke to turn and face him. Stop running. Be a man. Luke commanded Arrax to fly faster, but the young dragon was already terrified. They climbed into the storm clouds, trying to hide. For a moment there was only rain and thunder. Luke thought they had lost them. Then Vega erupted through the clouds directly above, jaws open, descending like an avalanche. What happened next would be debated for generations. Ullman claimed he lost control, that he was only trying to scare Luke, not kill him, that Vega acted on her own instinct, that dragons sometimes disobey their riders in the heat of the moment. Maybe that was true, or maybe Aemond gave the command and regretted it instantly. We will never know. The Gaga's jaws closed around Arrax. The small dragon's scream cut through the storm. The Gaga shook her head, and Arrax came apart, wings torn from body, blood raining into Shipbreaker Bay. Lucerys fell screaming into the sea far below. Anand circled on Vega, searching the waves for survivors. There were none. The boy and his dragon were gone, swallowed by the storm and the sea. When news reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra collapsed, her father dead, her daughter stillborn, now her son murdered. Daemon held her as she screamed her grief and rage. When she finally stopped crying, her face had changed. Something hard had settled behind her eyes. She looked at Daemon and said one word, with a gender to war. There would be no negotiations now, no peace talks, no mercy. Aemond had killed her son. Accidentally or not, it did not matter. Blood demanded blood. Fire demanded fire. But the Blacks had a problem. Dragons were their advantage, but they did not have enough riders. Rhaenyra's children were young. Several dragons sat riderless in the caves. Vermithor, Silverwing Seasmoke. Powerful beasts with no one to command them. Daemon proposed a solution that was either brilliant or insane. They would open dragon claiming to anyone with Targaryen blood, legitimized bastards, dragon seeds. Small folk with silver hair and purple eyes, who might carry a drop of Valyrian ancestry, anyone willing to try. It was dangerous. Most dragons killed those who tried to claim them without proper bloodline. The dragon pit was filled with stories of ambitious fools burned to ash or eaten, but Rhaenyra was desperate. She agreed. The call went out across Dragonstone and the surrounding islands. Any man with possible Targaryen heritage could present himself. Those who succeeded would be rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. Riches, lands, legitimacy, a dragon. Hundreds came. Fishermen, sailors, bastard sons of bastard sons. Men who had been told stories by their grandmothers about a Targaryen prince who visited their village generations ago. Some had the coloring, silver hair, purple eyes. Others just had ambition and lies. They led them to Vermithor first. The Bronze Fury, ancient, massive, still mourning his old rider. The first man who approached was a shipwright named Silver Dennis. He had the coloring. He had the confidence. He walked toward Vermithor, speaking high Valyrian commands he had learned phonetically, not truly understanding the words. Vermithor burned him to ash before he got within 20 feet. They tried again and again. Men died, screaming, burning. One was simply bitten in half. Another was crushed under Vermithor's claw when he tried to run. The dragon was not interested in replacing Jaehaerys. He killed claimant after claimant with what almost seemed like anger. How dare these lesser men think they could take the place of a king? Then Hugh Hammer stepped forward. Hugh was a blacksmith, massive shoulders, arms like tree trunks from years of hammerwork. He had silver hair, but whether it came from Targaryen blood or just happened naturally, no one was certain. He did not speak High Valyrian, did not know the commands. He simply walked toward Vermithor like he belonged there. Vermithor raised his head, growled. Hugh did not stop, did not flinch. The dragon's jaws opened. Fire gathered in his throat. Hugh stopped 10 feet away and met the dragon's eyes. They stared at each other, man and beast, neither backing down. Vermithor closed his jaws. The fire died. He lowered his massive head and allowed Hugh to touch his scales. The bond formed. The crowd, watching from a safe distance, erupted in cheers. The Bronze Fury had a new rider. Hugh Hammer had gone from blacksmith to dragonlord in a single moment. The power went to his head immediately. They brought others to Silverwing. She was gentler than Vermithor, but still a dragon, still dangerous, still capable of killing anyone who displeased her. Several tried and failed. Then came Ulf White. Ulf was a drunk. Everyone on Dragonstone knew him. He spent his days in taverns claiming to be the bastard son of some Targaryen prince. No one believed him. He was too common, too loud, too obviously full of nonsense. But he had silver hair and the courage of a man too drunk to understand danger. He approached Silverwing singing, actually singing some tavern song about a dragon and a maiden. Silverwing, who had been tense and aggressive with the previous claimants, seemed confused by this ridiculous man stumbling toward her, warbling off-key. She sniffed him. He smelled like wine and fish. He patted her snout like she was a dog, called her pretty. Silverwing accepted him. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she found him amusing. Maybe she recognized something in him that others could not see. Dragons have their own logic. Ulf White, the drunk who everyone mocked, suddenly had one of the largest dragons in Westeros. Like Hugh, he would come to believe he deserved more than gratitude, that having a dragon made him equal to any lord, that he should be rewarded, respected, feared. Both men would betray Rhaenyra before the war ended. But for now, the Blacks had gained 2 crucial riders. Seasmoke chose a dam of Hull on his own. The dragon had mourned Lananor for years. Then one day he approached Adam and bonded without hesitation. Adam was different from Hugh and Ulf. Humble, loyal, grateful. He would prove himself the best of the dragon seeds. Nettles claimed sheep stealer through patience and sheep. She became one of the most effective dragon riders in the war, despite having no formal training. She fought like the small folk she came from, cleverly, pragmatically, without honor or glory, just results. With these new riders, the Blacks now had overwhelming dragon superiority. Rhaenyra looked at her forces and saw victory. She would blockade King's Landing from the sea, starve the Greens into submission, use her dragons to destroy any army that tried to break the blockade. It was a sound strategy, but she had forgotten something crucial. The Greens had Vhagar, and Vhagar was not just large, she was experienced. She had fought in wars before these young dragons were born. She had killed other dragons. She knew how to hunt. The Greens also had something the Blacks did not: desperation. Aegon wore the crown. If Rhaenyra won, he would die. His brothers would die. His mother would die. They had no choice but to fight. Nothing makes people more dangerous than having no way out. The pieces were in place. Both sides had dragons. Both sides had riders. Both sides had riders. Both sides had believed they would win quickly. Neither side understood what was about to happen. Because once dragons start fighting other dragons, there is no control, no strategy, no clean victories, just fire and death and screaming from the sky. The dance was not a war, it was a mutual slaughter, and it was about to begin in earnest. The storm that killed Lucerys was nothing compared to the storm that was coming, a storm of dragonfire, a storm that would burn across Westeros for 2 years and leave the dragon species on the edge of extinction. They called it a dance, but there was nothing beautiful about what came next. The first true battle of the dance happened at a place called Rook's Rest, a small castle on the coast, strategically unimportant except for one detail. It was loyal to Rhaenyra and sat dangerously close to King's Landing. The Greens needed to take it, not for the castle itself, but to prove they could act, to show the realm they were not trapped in their capital. Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, marched on Rook's Rest with an army. Lord Staunton, who held the castle, sent a raven to Dragonstone begging for help. He could not hold against Cole's forces. He needed a dragon. Rhaenyra sent Rhaenys, the queen who never was, the woman who should have ruled the realm but had been passed over for being female. Now she would prove what the realm had lost by denying her. She mounted Meleys, the Red Queen, and flew toward Rook's Rest with vengeance in her heart. Meleys was fast, one of the fastest dragons alive, scarlet scales that gleamed like rubies in the sun. She and Rhaenys arrived at Rook's Rest like a red comet diving on Cole's army with fire and fury. Men burned, formations broke, Cole's soldiers scattered in panic. It was a slaughter. Rhaenys circled for another pass. Meleys roared victory. For a moment it seemed the battle was over. Then 2 dragons exploded from the forest where they had been hiding. Sunfire and Vhagar, Aegon and Aemond. The Greens had set a trap. They had used Cole's army as bait. Now they had Rhaenys alone, far from support, facing 2 dragons. Rhaenys could have fled. Rhaenys was faster than both pursuers. She could have escaped, lived to fight another day. But Rhaenys was not the type to run. She had spent her entire life being told she was not good enough, not the right choice, not worthy. Here was her chance to prove them all wrong. She turned Meleys toward the enemy and charged. The 3 dragons met in midair with a crash that sounded like thunder. Meleys was smaller than Vhagar, less armored than Sunfire, but faster than both. She fought with a fury that shocked even her opponents. Her jaws found Sunfire's wing and tore. The golden dragon screamed. Aegon, inexperienced in aerial combat, panicked. Sunfire thrashed wildly, throwing Aegon around in his chains. Vhagar came from above. The ancient dragon, massive and methodical, descended on Meleys like a landslide. Her jaws closed on Meleys' neck. Rhaenys felt her dragon shudder, felt the crunch of breaking bone. She drew her sword, screaming defiance, and tried to strike at Vhagar's eye. It was useless. Vhagar was too large, too strong. Meleys managed to break free for a moment, tearing her neck from Vhagar's jaws at terrible cost. Blood poured from the wound, but she was not done. She turned on Sunfire again, knowing the younger dragon was injured and that Aegon was vulnerable. Meleys was dying, but she would take one of them with her. Sunfire and Meleys collided in a tangle of claws and teeth. They fell together, ripping at each other, plummeting toward the ground. Aegon screamed. Rhaenys made no sound. She knew what was coming. They hit the earth with an impact that shook the battlefield. Both dragons lay broken. Sunfire was crippled, one wing shattered, his beautiful golden scales torn and bloody. Meleys was worse. Her neck was crushed, her body twisted. She raised her head once, looked at Rhaenys, and died. Soldiers found Rhaenys still strapped to her saddle, dead from the impact. Her sword was still in her hand. They said her expression was not one of fear or pain, but of satisfaction. She had proved herself. Finally, in death, the queen who never was had fought like the queen she should have been. But the cost was terrible. Aegon survived but was burned horribly when Vhagar's fire hit Sunfire in the confusion of battle. His armor melted into his skin. His body was broken. He would never be the same. Sunfire, the most beautiful dragon in the world, was crippled. He could barely walk, let alone fly. Both dragon and rider would spend months recovering, vulnerable and useless. The Greens had won the battle but nearly lost their king. The Blacks had lost their most experienced dragon rider. Neither side could claim victory, only loss. But the killing had just begun. Jacaerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's eldest son, led a fleet north to secure White Harbor and gain allies. The fleet was massive. Dozens of ships, thousands of men, and Jace flew above them on Vermax, protecting them from the sky. The plan was sound, until the Triarchy intervened. The Triarchy, a coalition of free cities across the narrow sea, had been paid by the Greens to attack Black ships. They sailed into the gullet, the narrow passage the Black fleet had to cross, and waited. Their ships bristled with scorpions, the giant crossbows designed to kill dragons, dozens of them, all aimed at the sky. Jace saw the trap too late. The Triarchy ships surrounded the Black fleet. Scorpion bolts began flying, not at the ships, at Vermax. Jace tried to evade. Vermax was young but fast. He dodged the first volley, the second, the third, but there were too many. A bolt caught Vermax in the side. The dragon shrieked and faltered. Another bolt hit his wing. He started to fall. Jace, desperate, tried to guide his wounded dragon toward a friendly ship. He almost made it. A final bolt caught Vermax through the neck. The dragon convulsed once and plummeted into the sea. Jace, still chained to the saddle, went with him. They both drowned in the cold waters of the gullet. The boy was 15 years old. When Rhaenyra heard, she did not cry. She had no tears left. Her father, her daughter, Lotta, now Jacaerys, her eldest son, her heir, the boy she had raised to be king, gone, drowned with his dragon in a pointless naval battle. Something broke inside her that day. She stopped thinking about ruling justly, stopped caring about her people's love. All she wanted now was revenge. She would take King's Landing. She would sit the Iron Throne. She would make the Greens pay for every death, every betrayal, every loss. And she had the dragons to do it. Daemon led an assault on Harrenhal, taking the cursed castle without a fight. From there he began raiding Green territories, burning supply lines, destroying infrastructure. Wherever he went, Caraxes spread terror. The bloodworm had become a nightmare, made real. Stories spread of entire villages burning, of Daemon laughing as Caraxes killed. Some stories were true, some were exaggerated. It did not matter. The fear was real. Meanwhile, the Blacks pressed their advantage. More dragons joined the fight. They began systematically destroying Green strongholds. For every loss they suffered, they inflicted 3 on their enemies. The Greens were losing. Slowly but surely, the war was turning against them. Then came the storming of the Dragon Pit. The moment everything changed. Rhaenyra had taken King's Landing. The dragons had ensured victory. Aegon had fled, badly wounded. The city was hers. She sat the Iron Throne at last, but the small folk hated her. They had suffered under her blockade, starved while she played at war, and now she parked her dragons in their city. In the Dragon Pit, that massive domed arena in the heart of King's Landing, a shepherd began preaching in the streets. He said the dragons were demons, that the war was punishment from the gods for allowing these creatures to exist, that the only way to end the suffering was to kill the dragons, all of them. The small folk, desperate and starving, listened. They grabbed weapons, torches, anything they could find, thousands of them. An angry mob united by suffering and faith and rage. They marched on the dragon pit. Inside were 5 dragons. Syrax, Rhaenyra's golden she-dragon, Dreamfire the pale blue dragon who had never fought, and 3 young dragons, barely old enough to fly, Tyraxes, Shriekos, Morgul. The mob broke down the doors, poured into the dragon pit like a flood. The dragons, confused and frightened by the noise and fire, attacked. Syrax burned hundreds with a single breath, but more kept coming, always more. They threw spears, shot crossbows, swarmed the dragons from every direction. Dreamfire, who had been sleeping, woke to find herself surrounded. She panicked, blasted fire in every direction, killed thousands. But the mob kept attacking. She tried to escape through the roof, smashing through the dome with her massive body. The structure collapsed. Tons of stone and wood fell on the dragons, and the people both. Dreamfire died crushed under rubble. Hundreds of small folk died with her. Tyraxes, Shriekos, and Morgul, too young to understand what was happening, died quickly, overwhelmed, stabbed and clubbed and hacked apart by sheer numbers. Their screams echoed through the city. Syrax died last. Rhaenyra, hearing the chaos, had tried to reach her dragon. She made it out of the Red Keep and ran toward the dragon pit. Syrax, sensing her rider's distress, tried to fly to her. The dragon had never been in real combat, had never fought anything more dangerous than training dummies. When the mob surrounded her in the streets, she fought bravely but uselessly. They pulled her down, killed her in the streets, butchered her like livestock. Rhaenyra's son Joffrey tried to reach Syrax during the chaos. He grabbed a rope, tried to climb onto the dragon's back as she flew overhead. He was 9 years old, terrified, desperate to save his mother's dragon. He fell. The impact killed him instantly. By dawn, 5 dragons were dead. Thousands of small folk were dead. The dragon pit was a ruin that still smolders today, and Rhaenyra had lost her mind to grief. The dance had reached a turning point. Dragons were not invincible. They could be killed, not by armies or knights or other dragons, but by sheer numbers, by people who had nothing left to lose. The small folk had struck back at their rulers and proved that dragons could bleed. But the war was not over. There were still dragons alive, still riders willing to fight. The most brutal battles were yet to come, and those battles would not take place in cities or castles but in the sky. Dragon against dragon, fire against fire, brother against brother. The dance was about to reach its bloody climax, and when it ended, the Age of Dragons would be over. After the Dragon Pit massacre, the war descended into pure chaos. Strategy abandoned, honor forgotten. It became about survival and revenge, nothing else. Each side wanted the other destroyed completely, and the dragons, those magnificent creatures that had built empires, became tools of mutual annihilation. Daemon Targaryen knew the war would not end while Aemond lived. Aemond had Rhaegar. As long as that ancient beast flew, the Greens had hope. Daemon needed to remove that hope permanently. He sent a message to Aemond. A challenge. Meet me above the God's Eye. Dragon against dragon. Rider against rider. Let us end this. Aemond accepted immediately. He wanted this fight. Craved it. Daemon was everything. Aemond wished to be. Experienced. Feared. Respected. This battle would prove who was the better warrior, the better dragon rider, the better man. They met at dawn above the lake called the God's Eye. Daemon on Caraxes, Aemond on Vhagar, the two largest living dragons about to fight to the death. Fishermen on the shore watched history unfold. Caraxes was smaller than Vhagar, but faster. Daemon circled, looking for an opening. Aemond, confident in Vhagar's size and strength, attacked head-on. The dragons collided mid-air with a sound like mountains crashing. They grappled, bit, clawed, tore at each other with a savagery that shocked even the veterans watching below. Vhagar's jaws closed on Caraxes' neck. The bloodworm screamed in pain and rage. But Caraxes was not done. He twisted in Vhagar's grip, his long serpentine body coiling around the larger dragon. His teeth found Vhagar's throat. Both dragons were locked together now, both dying, both falling. Daemon made his choice. He unchained himself from his saddle, stood on Caraxes' back. As both dragons plummeted toward the lake, he drew Dark Sister, his Valyrian steel sword, and he jumped. Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, leaped from his dying dragon onto Vhagar's massive head. Aemond saw him, tried to draw his own sword, too slow. Daemon drove Dark Sister through Aemond's remaining eye and into his brain. The young prince died instantly. Both dragons hit the water. The impact was catastrophic. Caraxes managed to crawl to shore, leaving a trail of blood before collapsing and dying. Rhaegar sank into the depths, taking Daemon and Aemond's bodies with her. Neither was ever recovered. The largest dragon in the world was dead. The most dangerous Targaryen was dead. The war should have ended there. But it did not. Too much blood had been spilled. Too much hatred remained. At Tumbleton, betrayal struck the Blacks. Hugh Hammer and Ulf White, the dragon seeds who had been given Vermithor and Silverwing, turned traitor. They had been promised lands and titles, had been treated like heroes. But it was not enough. They wanted more. Power, legitimacy, true nobility. The Greens offered them everything they wanted. Hugh and Ulf switched sides. Suddenly, the two largest dragons on the black side were fighting for the enemy. The betrayal was devastating. Armies that trusted the dragons found themselves burned by those same dragons. Entire battalions died confused, wondering why their own air support was killing them. Adam Balerion, still loyal to Rhaenyra, rode Seasmoke against the traitors. He knew it was suicide. Seasmoke was smaller than Vermithor, had no chance against both dragons together, but Adam had honor. He would not let betrayal go unanswered. The battle above Tumbleton was brief and brutal. Seasmoke fought valiantly, managed to wound Vermithor badly, but Silverwing attacked from behind, caught Seasmoke between the two larger dragons. They tore the grey dragon apart. Adan died with his dragon, loyal to the end. But the fight was not over. Prince Daeron, Aegon's youngest brother, arrived on Tessarion. The Blue Queen joined the fight. In the chaos, Tessarion and Vermithor collided. Both dragons, already wounded, tore at each other in midair. They fell together, crashed through a building, died in the rubble. Hugh Hammer was crushed under Vermithor. Daeron burned when Tessarion's fire ignited a cache of wildfire hidden in the town. Ulf White survived initially, but was murdered by his own allies afterward. The Greens did not trust turncoats even when they benefited from their betrayal. 3 more dragons dead, 3 more riders gone. The war was consuming everything, everyone. While armies fought on the ground, Aegon the Elder, recovered enough to fly again, had retreated to Dragonstone with the crippled Sunfire. The golden dragon could barely fly. His wing was shattered. He was in constant pain, but he could still kill. Grey Ghost, the shy wild dragon who had avoided all human contact, made the mistake of hunting near Sunfire's lair. The two dragons fought over territory and food. Sunfire's, despite his injuries, was more experienced, more vicious. He killed Grey Ghost and fed on the corpse for days. It was the last meal Sunfire would enjoy. Baela Targaryen, Daemon's daughter, discovered Aegon hiding on Dragonstone. She had her own dragon, Dancer, young, small but fast and fierce. She attacked Aegon without hesitation. She did not care that Sunfire was larger, did not care that this might be suicide. Aegon had helped kill her family. That was enough. Moondancer dove on Sunfire from above. The golden dragon, weakened and slow from his injuries, could not dodge. Moondancer's claws raked his already damaged wing. Her teeth found his neck. Sunfire roared and twisted, catching Moondancer in his jaws. Both dragons fell, fighting, crashing to the ground. Moondancer died on impact. Baela survived, badly injured. Sunfire, mortally wounded, could no longer fly, could barely move. But Aegon had won. He captured Rhaenyra, who had fled to Dragonstone, thinking it was safe. Aegon's revenge was terrible. He had lost his brothers. His dragon was dying. His body was broken. He blamed Rhaenyra for all of it. He ordered Sunfire to execute her, to burn and eat her while her son Aegon the Younger watched. The boy was 10 years old. He watched his mother die screaming, watched his uncle's crippled dragon feed on her corpse. It was the cruelest act in a war full of cruelties, and it accomplished nothing. Rhaenyra was dead, but her supporters remained. The war continued. Sunfire died shortly after from his wounds. The most beautiful dragon ever born died ugly and broken, alone on Dragonstone. Aegon was now king of a destroyed realm, with no dragon, no army, and no legitimacy. He was poisoned by his own men soon after. The war ended not with a grand battle, but with a whimper. A broken king murdered in his own castle. Aegon the Younger, Rhaenyra's son, became Aegon III, a traumatized child who had watched his mother eaten by a dragon. They would call him the Dragonbane. Whether he deliberately caused what happened next, or whether it was simply fate, we will never know for certain. But after the dance, only 4 dragons remained alive. Silverwing, who had fled after the betrayal at Tumbleton, Sheepstealer, who had flown east with Nettles and was never seen again. Morning, a young dragon hatched during the war, who was too small to fight, and the cannibal, who had never been claimed and now disappeared into legend. The dance of the dragons was over. 16 dragons dead in 2 years. Nearly all the experienced riders dead. The Targaryen dynasty crippled, the realm devastated. Entire regions burned, tens of thousands dead. And for what? Both claimants to the throne were dead. The war solved nothing, proved nothing, changed nothing except to ensure that dragons, those magnificent creatures that had ruled the skies for thousands of years, were now on the edge of extinction. The dragons had built the Targaryen Empire, and in the dance they had nearly destroyed it. The survivors learned a terrible lesson, that giving humans this much power was a mistake. That dragons were not symbols of strength, but of destruction. That sometimes winning means everyone loses. Aegon III ruled over a broken kingdom with 3 sickly dragons that would never breed successfully. He watched them die one by one, unable or unwilling to save them. Whether through neglect, poison, or simply the loss of Valyrian knowledge, the dragons faded. Within 30 years the last dragon died, a small, twisted creature that could barely breathe, let alone fly. The age of dragons was over, and Westeros learned to fear the sky being empty, far less than they had feared it filled with fire. The dance taught one final lesson, that the most dangerous thing about dragons was not their fire or their size or their hunger. It was that humans could ride them, could command them, could turn them against each other. Dragons did not destroy themselves. Humans destroyed them. And in doing so, humans lost the very thing that made them powerful. The irony was perfect, and in the centuries that followed, as Targaryen power waned without dragons to enforce it, the realm would wonder if perhaps the dragons had been necessary after all, if perhaps the fear they inspired was the only thing holding the kingdoms together. But by then, it was too late. The dragons were gone, and they would stay gone for 150 years. Aegon III was 11 years old when he became king, and he had already seen too much death. He had watched his brothers die, watched his mother burned alive and devoured, watched dragons tear each other apart in the skies above Westeros. When people spoke of dragons in his presence, his face would go blank, empty, as if some part of him had shut down to survive the memories. They called him Aegon, the Dragonbane. Some claimed he hated dragons so much that he deliberately let them die. Others said he was simply a traumatized child who could not bear to be near the creatures that had destroyed his family. The truth, as always, was more complicated. When Aegon became king, 3 dragons remained. Morning, a young she-dragon with pale pink scales, who had hatched during the dance. Silverwing, who had returned to Dragonstone after her rider's betrayal and death. And the cannibal who had vanished into the wilderness and would never be seen again. Some claimed Sheepstealer still lived somewhere in the mountains of the moon with nettles, but no confirmed sightings ever came. 3 dragons out of nearly 20 that had lived before the war. The species was on the edge of collapse, and everyone knew it. The question was whether anyone cared enough to save them. During Aegon's reign, several dragons hatched from eggs that had been carefully preserved. The maesters and dragon keepers tried everything they remembered from the old Valyrian texts. They provided heat. They performed rituals. They had people with Targaryen blood present during the hatching. Some eggs did hatch. Tiny dragons emerged, smaller than cats, making sounds like broken glass scraping stone. But something was wrong. These dragons were malformed, twisted. Their wings bent at unnatural angles. Their scales grew in patches, leaving raw flesh exposed. Their eyes were clouded or missing entirely. Some had extra limbs, others had none. They could not fly, could barely walk. They made sounds of constant pain. The dragon keepers tried to care for them, fed them, kept them warm, hoped they would grow stronger. They did not. One by one, these deformed hatchlings died. Some lived for weeks, others for months. The longest surviving was a pitiful creature that lived for nearly 2 years, blind and unable to stand, fed by hand until it finally stopped breathing. What had gone wrong? Theories spread throughout the realm and have been debated ever since. The most common explanation blamed the dragon pit. For over 100 years, dragons had been kept in that massive domed structure in King's Landing. It seemed logical at the time. Keep the dragons contained, prevent them from wandering, protect the small folk from accidental burns or attacks. But the dragon pit, despite its size, was still a cage. Dragons never stop growing. In the wild, they can become massive. Balerion had been proof of that. Born in Valyria, he had spent most of his life free to fly and hunt. He grew larger than any dragon pit dragon ever would. But dragons raised in confinement, even in a structure as vast as the dragon pit, had their growth stunted. They became smaller, weaker, more prone to illness. The dance had destroyed the dragon pit. The surviving dragons had no proper home. They were kept in caves on Dragonstone, or in makeshift structures that were even worse than the dragon pit had been. The breeding conditions were terrible. Perhaps the eggs themselves had been damaged. Perhaps the hatchlings suffered from generations of confined breeding that had weakened their bloodlines. But there was another theory, one that was whispered in corners and never spoken aloud in official histories. the Maester conspiracy. The Citadel in Old Town had always been suspicious of magic. Masters valued knowledge, reason, science. They built their power on understanding the natural world through observation and logic. Dragons represented something they could not explain, could not control, could not understand through rational means. Dragons were magic, and magic threatened everything the Masters had built. Some claimed that certain Meisters had worked for generations to eliminate dragons from the world, that they had poisoned dragons slowly, sabotaged breeding programs, spread diseases, gave bad advice to dragon keepers disguised as helpful suggestions. When the dance destroyed most of the dragons, these theoretical conspirators simply needed to finish what the war had started. Was this true? There is no proof, no documents, no confessions, but the timing is suspicious. Dragons had survived for thousands of years in Valyria, had bred successfully for over a century in Westeros. Then suddenly, within 30 years of the dance, every dragon was dead or dying. Every egg produced deformed hatchlings. Every attempt to revive the species failed. Coincidence or conspiracy? A third theory suggested the loss of Valyrian knowledge. The Targaryens had fled Valyria before the Doom. They had brought dragons and some understanding of how to care for them, but they had not brought everything. The deepest secrets of dragon breeding, the blood magic rituals that ensured healthy hatchlings, the spells that bonded rider to dragon, all of that had been lost when Valyria sank beneath the waves. For a century, the Targaryens had managed using what knowledge they retained. But that knowledge degraded with each generation. Details were forgotten. Rituals were performed incorrectly. Without the full understanding, perhaps it was inevitable that dragon breeding would fail eventually. The dance simply accelerated the collapse. A fourth possibility was simple in breeding. The Targaryens practiced incestuous marriage to keep their bloodline pure. Brother married sister, uncle married niece. This led to madness and deformity in the human line. Perhaps the dragons, all descended from the same small group that had fled Valyria, suffered from the same problem. Too little genetic diversity, too many generations of breeding from a limited stock. The species had become too weak to survive. Or perhaps it was all of these factors combined. Poor living conditions, possible sabotage, lost knowledge, and genetic decline, creating a perfect storm that made dragon extinction inevitable. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. By the year 153 after Aegon's conquest, the last dragon died. It was small, sickly, had never been named. It spent its short life in a cave on Dragonstone, unable to fly, barely able to eat. When it finally died, the dragon keepers reported it almost seemed relieved, as if living had been painful and death was mercy. Aegon III had ruled for 26 years. During that time, he had watched every dragon die. Some claimed he was glad that the boy who had seen his mother eaten finally had his revenge. Others said he mourned each death privately, carrying guilt that perhaps he could have done more. The truth was probably simpler. Aegon was a broken man ruling a broken kingdom. The dance had devastated Westeros. Entire regions were burned. The population had dropped dramatically. The economy was destroyed. Aegon spent his reign trying to rebuild, and dragons were simply not a priority. They represented the past. A past filled with fire and death and civil war. Perhaps it was easier to let them go. The realm adjusted to life without dragons. At first, there was fear. How would the Targaryens maintain control? Their entire power structure had been built on dragon supremacy. Without that advantage, they were just another noble house with a fancy family tree and delusions of divine right. But something unexpected happened. The absence of dragons forced the Targaryens to actually govern, to build alliances, to compromise, to rule through politics and diplomacy, rather than threats and fire. For several generations, this worked. The Targaryen kings who followed were remembered as generally decent rulers, not great perhaps, but not terrible. They learned to be human. Yet the legacy of dragons never truly died. Every Targaryen child was taught the histories, told about Aegon's conquest, about Balerion the Black Dread, about the glory days when their ancestors ruled the skies. Dragon skulls lined the walls beneath the Red Keep, physical reminders of what the family had lost. The three-headed dragon remained on their banners, fire and blood remained their words. And they kept trying to bring dragons back. Over the decades and centuries, various Targaryen kings attempted to hatch dragon eggs. They tried fire. They tried blood magic. They tried rituals half-remembered from old texts. They tried everything except accepting that perhaps dragons were meant to be extinct. The most infamous attempt happened at a place called Summerhall in the year 259 after the conquest. King Aegon V, a good man who wanted to be a great king, became obsessed with dragons. He believed that if he could bring them back, he could force reforms on the realm, end serfdom, protect the small folk, break the power of corrupt lords. Dragons would give him the power to build a better world. He gathered dragon eggs, consulted with pyromancers and shadowbinders, and anyone who claimed knowledge of ancient magic, made plans for a grand ritual. The details of what happened next are unclear, because most witnesses died, but we know this much. On the day Prince Rhaegar was born, Summerhall burned. The entire palace went up in flames so hot they could be seen for miles. King Aegon died in the fire. His heir Prince Duncan died. Multiple lords and servants died. The palace was destroyed completely, and the dragon eggs, if they hatched at all, did not survive. Rhaegar Targaryen was born literally in the ashes of his family's last attempt to bring back dragons. Born amidst salt and smoke, as the prophecy said, he grew up obsessed with prophecy himself, believing he was meant for something great. Perhaps he was meant to be the one to restore dragons. But Rhaegar died on the Trident, killed by Robert Baratheon's warhammer before he could ever try. When Robert's rebellion succeeded and the Targaryens were overthrown, the Age of Dragons seemed permanently finished. Robert smashed the Targaryen dynasty, killed Rhaegar, would have killed every Targaryen he could find. The surviving members fled across the narrow sea to Essos, becoming beggars and exiles. The dragon skulls in King's Landing were left to gather dust, symbols of a dead age, a failed dynasty, an extinct species. For 15 years, the world moved on without dragons. People stopped telling stories about them, except as history. Children who asked if dragons were real were told no, they were legends, made up, fantasy. The rational world had won. Magic was gone. Dragons were impossible. Then, in the year 298 after Aegon's conquest, in a funeral pyre on the Dothraki Sea, 3 eggs that had turned to stone cracked open. 3 hatchlings emerged, 3 tiny dragons, the first to live in over 150 years. And the woman who birthed them walked out of the fire, unburnt, holding them in her arms like children. Daenerys Targaryen, last of her name, had done what no one else could. She had brought dragons back from extinction, not through careful planning, or ancient knowledge or powerful magic, but through sacrifice, through desperation, through blood and fire and loss. The question now was whether the world was ready for dragons again, whether humanity had learned anything from the dance, whether this time would be different, or whether history was about to repeat itself in the worst possible way. To understand how dragons returned, we need to go back before the funeral pyre, back to a girl who owned nothing except 3 lumps of stone that might have once been alive. Daenerys Targaryen had been sold like property. That was the reality. Her brother Viserys, the rightful king in exile, or a delusional madman, depending on who you asked, had arranged her marriage to Khal Drogo, a Dothraki warlord who commanded 40,000 riders. Viserys wanted those riders, wanted an army to invade Westeros and reclaim his throne, and the price for that army was his sister. Daenerys was 13 years old, terrified, alone. She had spent her entire life running. Born on Dragonstone during a massive storm while her mother died giving birth, she had been smuggled across the narrow sea as an infant. She grew up in Essos, moving from city to city, always one step ahead of Robert Baratheon's assassins, always hungry, always afraid. Her brother was all she had, and her brother was cruel. The wedding was a spectacle. Dothraki customs, blood and violence and celebration. Daenerys received many gifts, weapons she could not use, clothes that did not fit, things appropriate for a Dothraki Khaleesi, but meaningless to a frightened girl who just wanted to go home. Except she had no home. Westeros was a dream. Essos was hostile. She belonged nowhere. Then Illyrio Mopati, the magister who had hosted her and Viserys, presented his gift. 3 dragon eggs. He said they came from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, from the Far East where strange things still happened, where magic had not completely died. The eggs were beautiful, each one different. One was black with deep red ripples, like frozen fire. One was pale cream with swirls of gold, like dawn breaking. One was dark green with bronze highlights, like forest shadows. They were heavy, warm to the touch despite being stone. Their scales caught the light in ways that seemed impossible. Illyrio told her they were priceless, that collectors would pay fortunes for them, that they had been stone for centuries, but were still valuable as art, as history, as symbols. He smiled when he said it, a merchant's smile, calculating what they were worth. But to Daenerys, they meant something different. They were Targaryen. Dragon eggs were her family's legacy, the only physical connection she had to the dynasty that had once ruled Westeros. Her ancestors had ridden dragons, had conquered kingdoms on dragonback. These eggs, even if they would never hatch, were proof that she came from something greater than her current miserable existence. She kept them close, placed them in braziers so they were always warm, touched them constantly, spoke to them sometimes when she was alone. She knew it was foolish, knew they were just stone, but they were hers, in a way nothing else ever had been. Her life with the Dothraki was hard at first. The riding hurt, the language confused her, the customs frightened her, but slowly she adapted, learned, grew stronger. Khal Drogo, who she had feared, became something unexpected. Not love, not at first, but respect, partnership. He was brutal with his enemies, but surprisingly gentle with her, taught her to be Dothraki, to ride, to command, to be Khaleesi. She became pregnant, carried a son. The Dothraki celebrated. They said her son would be the stallion who mounts the world, the Khal, who would unite all the Khalasars and conquer everything. Prophecy and destiny swirled around her unborn child. For the first time since her parents died, Daenerys had hope. She had a family, a place, a future. Then it all fell apart. Viserys could not handle being irrelevant. He had promised the Dothraki to Westeros, but Drogo showed no interest in crossing the sea. Why would he? He ruled the grasslands. He had everything he wanted. Viserys became more desperate, more demanding, more unstable. He threatened Daenerys, threatened her unborn child, demanded his army, his crown, his birthright. Drogo gave him a crown. Melted gold poured over his head. Viserys died screaming, and Daenerys watched without tears. Her brother, who she had spent her life fearing and serving, was finally gone. She was free, but she was also more alone than ever. Then Drogo was wounded, a minor cut from a fight with a rival. Nothing serious. until it became infected. The wound turned black, began to stink. Drogo grew weak, feverish, delirious. The Dothraki knew what this meant. Their Khal was dying, and when a Khal died, his khalasar broke apart. The strong took what they wanted. The weak were abandoned. Daenerys was desperate. She turned to Mirri Maz Duur, a woman the Dothraki had captured, a god's wife, a healer, someone who might have knowledge beyond what the Dothraki healers possessed. Mirri promised she could save Durga, but she needed to perform a ritual. Blood magic, dangerous, unpredictable. But what choice did Daenerys have? She agreed. The ritual required a sacrifice, a life for a life. Daenerys offered Drogo's horse. The animal was killed, the magic was performed. Drogo survived, but something was wrong. He breathed but did not wake. His eyes opened but saw nothing. He lived but only barely, an empty shell, a body without a mind. And Daenerys went into early labor from the stress. The baby came too soon, born dead, deformed, twisted, covered in scales. The gods' wives who attended the birth screamed, said the child was monstrous, cursed. They told Daenerys her son had been dead for months, that whatever Mirri had done during her ritual had killed the unborn child, traded his life for Drogo's empty existence. Daenerys had lost everything. Her brother, her husband, her son, her khalasar was abandoning her. Most of the riders had already left with stronger leaders. Those who remained stayed out of pity or habit, but they would leave soon. She was a teenager girl with nothing, no home, no family, no future, except for 3 stone eggs that had never hatched, and a dying man who used to be a king. She made a decision. If she was going to die, it would be on her terms. She built a funeral pyre for Drogo, massive, using all the wood she could gather. She placed his body on top, dressed in his finest armor, placed his arak in his hands, made him look like the warrior he had been. Then she added her dragon eggs, placed them around his body, one near his head, one by his heart, one by his feet. People told her she was mad. The eggs were valuable. She could sell them, use them to buy passage somewhere, to start over. But Daenerys was done running, done surviving, done being weak. She ordered Mirri Maz Duur bound and placed on the pyre as well. The god's wife who had promised to save Drogo and had delivered only death. Mirri did not beg, did not plead. She laughed, said Daenerys understood nothing about the price of power, that only death can pay for life, that blood magic always costs more than you think. As the sun set, Daenerys lit the pyre. The flames rose, the wood crackled. Drogo's body began to burn. Mirri screamed as the fire took her, and Daenerys, before anyone could stop her, walked into the flames. Her handmaiden Doria tried to grab her. Her blood rider shouted, but she did not stop. She walked into the funeral pyre of her dead husband, into the flames that were consuming the woman who had destroyed her life, into the fire itself. And she did not burn. The flames rose around her, higher than any natural fire should reach, hot enough that people watching had to step back. The pyre burned all night. Those who stayed watched in horror and fascination, waiting for Daenerys' screams, waiting for the smell of burning flesh. It never came. At dawn, when the fires died, Daenerys sat in the ashes, naked, unburnt, covered in soot but unmarked. Her hair had burned away, but her skin was perfect, and in her arms she held 3 small creatures. Dragons, living, breathing, moving dragons. One black with red eyes, already strong and aggressive. One green with bronze highlights, curious and alert. One cream with gold, beautiful and gentle. They were the size of cats. Their scales gleamed in the morning light. Their tiny wings fluttered. They made sounds like glass chimes in the wind. The survivors of her Khalasar, those few who had stayed, fell to their knees. They had watched a girl walk into fire and emerge as something else, something more. They had seen dragons born from stone, witnessed magic return to a world that had forgotten what magic looked like. Daenerys stood, covered in ash, holding 3 dragons. She was 14 years old. She owned nothing, commanded almost no one, had no army, no wealth, no power, except what had just hatched in her arms. But she had done something no one else had accomplished in over 150 years. She had brought dragons back from extinction. She was the mother of dragons, the unburnt, the last Targaryen. And the world was about to learn what that meant. The dragons grew quickly. Within days they had doubled in size. Within weeks they were too large to carry comfortably. Within months they were the size of large dogs and eating more than Daenerys could easily provide. Dragons, it turned out, are expensive. She named them carefully, each name a memorial, a promise, a connection to the family she had lost. Drogon, named for Khal Drogo, black scales like night with eyes like hot coals, red membranes on his wings that looked like blood when he flew against the sun. From the beginning, Drogon was the strongest, the most aggressive, the alpha. When the dragons fed, Drogon ate first. When they slept, the others curled around him. When Daenerys called, Drogon came fastest. The bond between them was immediate and absolute. Rhaegal, named for her brother Rhaegar, the prince she had never met but whose legacy haunted her family. Green scales with bronze undertones, larger than Viserion, but smaller than Drogon. More temperamental than his brothers, quick to anger, difficult to predict, but loyal. Once he decided you were his, he had his namesake's complexity, beautiful and dangerous and sad, somehow. Viserion, named for her brother Viserys, the one who had sold her, abused her, died screaming for a crown he never deserved. Some asked why she would name a dragon for him. She said, because Viserys had dreamed of dragons too, had wanted them more than anything. This was the dragon he would have loved, cream-colored scales with gold highlights, the most beautiful of the 3, the gentlest, the one who seemed to enjoy being touched, the one who played rather than fought. The dragons changed everything. Suddenly, Daenerys had leverage. People who would have ignored a teenage girl with a handful of followers paid attention to the teenage girl with 3 dragons, even baby dragons, even dragons that could not yet carry a rider or burn down a city. The potential was enough. She traveled to Qarth, the greatest city in Essos, a place of wealth and magic and ancient power. The merchants and warlocks invited her in eagerly, not because they cared about her claim to Westeros, because they wanted her dragons to study, to steal, to use for their own purposes. The dragons were kept in a garden while Daenerys negotiated with the 13 Qarth's ruling council. She returned one day to find them gone, stolen, her children taken while she was distracted by politics and promises. She tracked them to the House of the Undying, a place where warlocks practiced their ancient arts. The building itself was wrong, geometry that hurt to look at, doors that led to impossible places. The warlocks had taken her dragons to feed on their magic. Dragon presence amplified the warlocks' powers, made them stronger, more dangerous. They had no intention of returning the dragons or letting Daenerys leave. She found her children chained in a dark chamber, weak, frightened. She ran to them. Drogon saw her, recognized her. And despite the chains, despite his young age, despite everything, he breathed fire. Not much. A small burst, enough to ignite the robe of Pyat Pri, the warlock who stood between Daenerys and her dragons. The man burned. The House of the Undying burned. Daenerys freed her dragons and escaped, while the warlock's sanctuary collapsed around them. She had learned something crucial that day. Dragons were not just valuable, they were weapons, and even young dragons could kill. From Karth, she traveled to Astapor, one of the great slave cities of Slavers Bay. She needed an army. Her handful of followers was not enough to take Westeros, not enough to protect her dragons, not enough to matter. In Astapor she could buy the Unsullied, the greatest soldiers in the world. Eunuch warriors trained from childhood to feel no pain, no fear, no mercy. 8,000 of them, more than enough. The price was Drogon. The slaver, a vile man named Krasnis, wanted her largest dragon, said one dragon was worth all 8,000 Unsullied, plus the translator and the boys still in training. It was an insane price, but also an insult. He did not believe she would do it, did not think she would trade away her child for an army. Daenerys agreed. She handed Drogon's chain to Krasnis, took command of the Unsullied. Krasnis held the chain, grinning. He had a dragon. He was untouchable now. He could conquer cities, build an empire. All because this foolish girl had traded away the only thing that made her special. Then Daenerys spoke in High Valyrian, a language she had been learning in secret, a language the slavers assumed she did not understand. She gave Drogon a command: Dracarys, Dragonfire. Drogon opened his jaws and burned Krasnis alive. The slaver died screaming. The other masters began to shout orders, but Daenerys had already given her next commands to the Unsullied, to Drogon, to all 3 dragons: kill the slavers, free the slaves, burn the city's chains. Astapor became chaos. The masters who had grown rich selling human beings died in fire and blood. The Unsullied, confused at first, realized they were free, that this girl had bought them only to release them from servitude. They chose to follow her anyway, not as slaves, as free men who had chosen their commander. Daenerys walked through the burning city with 3 dragons flying overhead and 8,000 Unsullied marching behind her. She was 16 years old. She had an army, she had a cause, she had dragons, and she had a new title that would spread across Essos and eventually Westeros: Breaker of Chains. But raising dragons was harder than commanding armies. As they grew larger, they became more difficult to control. Drogon especially. He would disappear for days, hunting, exploring, growing. When he returned, he was always bigger, always more independent. The bond was still there, but he was not a pet, not a possession. He was a wild creature who happened to love her. In Meereen, the greatest of the slave cities, the problems became obvious. The dragons were now the size of horses, too large to keep in rooms, too dangerous to let wander freely. Drogon killed a child, a 3-year-old girl, burned her while she was herding sheep. The father brought the tiny bones to Daenerys, blackened, proof that her children were killers. She made a choice she would regret for the rest of her life. She chained Rhaegal and Viserion in the catacombs beneath her pyramid, locked them in darkness. She could not find Drogon to chain him. He had disappeared again, but 2 out of 3 was better than none. The decision haunted her. Every night, she heard them, roaring, screaming, calling for her, begging to be free. But she was trying to rule, trying to be a queen, trying to prove she was more than just a girl with dragons, that she could govern, could build, could create something better than what had come before. The chained dragons suffered. They stopped growing as fast, became aggressive toward the servants who fed them. Rhaegal nearly killed a man who came too close. Viserion stopped eating for weeks. They were dying slowly, not from lack of food or care, from captivity itself. Dragons are meant to fly, meant to hunt, meant to be free. Chaining them was like chaining the sun. Unnatural, wrong. Tyrion Lannister, who had joined her cause after his own exile, convinced her to let them go. He walked into the catacombs unarmed, approached the dragons without fear, spoke to them softly, released their chains. They could have killed him, should have killed him. Instead, they looked at him with what almost seemed like gratitude. Then they flew out into the sky and disappeared, 2 more dragons beyond her control. Drogon returned on his own, not because he was commanded, because his mother was in danger. She had been trapped in a fighting pit by an insurgent group called the Sons of the Harpy, surrounded, about to die. Then shadow fell over the arena, wings blocked out the sun. Drogon landed among her enemies and burned them alive. Dozens died in seconds. He was massive now, larger than any horse. His fire could melt stone. Daenerys, acting on instinct and desperation, climbed onto his back. No saddle, no chains, no training, just a woman and a dragon, and a bond that went deeper than words. Drogon launched into the sky with her clinging to his scales. They flew together for the first time, really flew, and Daenerys understood what her ancestors must have felt. The power, the freedom, the absolute certainty that nothing in the world could touch her while she rode a dragon. But Drogon was injured. Spears from the fighting pit had wounded him. He flew far from Meereen and landed in the wilderness to recover. Daenerys stayed with him, ate what she could find, waited for him to heal. They were alone together for days. Dragon and rider, mother and child. She spoke to him constantly, told him her fears, her hopes, her doubts. Drogon listened, understood in ways that went beyond language. When Drogon recovered, they returned to Meereen together. The city had been attacked in her absence. Her advisors had freed Rhaegal and Viserion to defend against the enemy fleet. The dragons, angry from their captivity, had been devastatingly effective. Dozens of ships burned, thousands died. The siege broke. Daenerys had 3 dragons again, all alive, all growing larger every day, all bonded to her but also increasingly independent. They were not tools, not weapons she could simply point at her enemies. They were individuals. Drogon was fierce and loyal. Rhaegal was proud and unpredictable. Viserion was gentle but capable of terrible violence when threatened. She began to understand what the Targaryens of old must have known, that dragons amplify everything. Your strength, your cruelty, your mercy, your madness. That having this much power changes you, makes you believe you are right, makes you forget that fire does not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. But she was not her father. She was not the Mad King who burned people alive for imagined crimes. She was different, better. She would break the wheel, free the oppressed, build something new. The dragons were her tools to achieve that, her weapons to defeat those who would enslave others. At least, that was what she told herself, what she believed. And for a while, it seemed true. She used her dragons carefully, strategically, burned slave masters who deserved death, destroyed armies that threatened the innocent. She was just fair, righteous. The question was whether that would last, whether having 3 dragons and believing in your own righteousness was enough to avoid becoming what you fought against, whether power that absolute could be wielded without corruption. The answer would come in Westeros, in a war for the Iron Throne, in a city called King's Landing, and the answer would be written in fire and ash and blood. But we are not there yet. First, she had to cross the narrow sea, had to face the land that had exiled her, had to confront the truth that bringing dragons back to Westeros might be the greatest gift she could offer, or the worst curse. Daenerys Targaryen sailed for Westeros with 3 dragons, an army, and a claim. She believed the 7 kingdoms would welcome her. After all, her family had ruled for 3 centuries. The Baratheons and Lannisters were usurpers. She was the rightful queen returning to liberate her people from tyranny. Westeros did not see it that way. To most people in the Seven Kingdoms, Daenerys was a foreign invader. She brought Dothraki savages, unsullied who did not speak the common tongue. She worshipped strange gods, and she had dragons, creatures from nightmare and legend, that their grandparents said were extinct. The small folk were terrified. The nobles were hostile. Even those who might have supported her claim hesitated because of what she represented: change, upheaval, fire. She established herself on Dragonstone, the ancient Targaryen seat. The castle was empty, abandoned. She walked through halls her ancestors had built and felt the weight of history. This was where the Targaryens had prepared for Aegon's conquest, where dragon eggs had hatched for generations, where her dynasty began. But history was not enough. She needed allies, needed to prove that her dragons made her unstoppable, that fighting her was suicide. She had tried subtlety, tried diplomacy. The Westerosi lords ignored her, mocked her, rejected her envoys. So she decided to show them what dragons could do. The Lannister army was returning from Highgarden. They had just sacked the castle, stolen the Tyrell gold, seized food supplies. A long column of soldiers and wagons stretched across the countryside, confident and victorious. They had crushed House Tyrell, removed one of Daenerys's potential allies. They were untouchable. Then Daenerys arrived on Drogon with the Dothraki following behind. The Lannister soldiers saw the shadow first, enormous, moving fast across the ground. They looked up. Some of them screamed. Others froze. Most had never seen a dragon, except in drawings, never truly believed they existed. Now one was diving toward them, and it was larger than any building they had ever seen. Drogon opened his jaws, and the world became fire. The wagons exploded. Food supplies ignited. Men burned where they stood. Armor melted into skin. Horses stamped in panic. The neat formations dissolved into chaos. Officers shouted orders. Nobody could hear over the roaring and screaming. The Dothraki charged through the gaps Drogon had created, cutting down anyone who remained standing. Jaime Lannister watched his army destroyed in minutes. He had fought in wars for decades, had seen thousands die. But this was different. This was not war. This was extermination. One dragon had done what would have taken 10,000 men hours of fighting, and Daenerys sat on that dragon's back, directing the slaughter with terrible precision. Drogon landed among the survivors. Daenerys dismounted. She gave them a choice: bend the knee, join her, or refuse and burn. Most knelt, some did not. Those who refused, she burned, not with pleasure, not with anger. Simply as a fact, she had given them the option. They had chosen death. Drogon provided it. Jaime saw this, saw the woman who claimed to be different from her father executing prisoners with dragonfire. He saw the scorpion, the giant crossbow Qyburn had designed based on ancient Dornish weapons. It was mounted on a wagon 20 yards away, loaded, ready. Bronn reached it first, aimed at Drogon. The dragon's massive form was impossible to miss. He fired. The bolt shot through the air faster than anything natural, struck Drogon in the shoulder. The dragon roared in pain and fury. Blood sprayed. Drogon spun toward the threat. Bronn ran. Jaime saw Daenerys exposed, vulnerable. If she died, the dragons would be masterless. The war would end. He spurred his horse, charged at her with a lance. It was suicide, foolish, desperate. But perhaps if he died killing her, it would matter, would mean something. Drogon saw him coming, turned, opened his jaws. Fire gathered in his throat. Jaime was about to die, the same way his father had threatened others, burned by a Targaryen dragon. There was poetry in that. Cruel poetry. Bronn tackled Jaime off his horse. Both men crashed into the river. The fire passed over them. They sank into the water, armor dragging them down. By the time they surfaced downstream, the battle was over. The Lannister army had been destroyed. Daenerys had proven her point. Dragons were not legends. They were weapons, and she had 3 of them. But the battle taught her something uncomfortable. Drogon had been wounded. One ballista bolt from a skilled operator had pierced his scales. If there had been 10 scorpions, 20. If the Lannisters had been prepared, the outcome might have been different. Dragons were powerful, but not invincible. The Dornish had killed Meraxes with a scorpion bolt through the eye. It could happen again. Qyburn, the Mad Queen Cersei's advisor, began mass-producing scorpions, mounted them on the walls of King's Landing, on ships, on mobile wagons. The design improved with each iteration, larger, more powerful, faster to reload. The Lannisters were preparing to fight dragons the way the Dornish had, with overwhelming numbers of anti-air weapons. Daenerys heard about this, dismissed it. She had 3 dragons. The Lannisters could build 1,000 scorpions, and it would not matter. She was destined to rule. The dragons proved that nothing could stop her. Then came the mission beyond the wall. Jon Snow, the king in the north, had come to Dragonstone seeking her help. He spoke of an army of the dead marching south, of night walkers who had not been seen in thousands of years, of a threat that made their war for the throne meaningless. Daenerys did not believe him at first. The dead rising, it sounded like a story to frighten children. But Jon was sincere, desperate. He asked for nothing except that she believe him, help him, save the realm. They were both fighting over. Eventually his honesty moved her. Or perhaps it was something else. Something she felt when she looked at him. A connection, a recognition. Something she could not name, but felt deeply. Jon led a mission beyond the wall to capture a white, proof of the army of the dead. Evidence that would convince Cersei to join them against the real enemy. It was a desperate plan. Probably suicidal, but the only option left. The mission failed. Jon and his men were trapped on a frozen lake, surrounded by whites, thousands of them. The ice would not hold forever. When it broke, they would be overwhelmed. Jon sent a raven to Daenerys, a plea for help. He did not expect her to come. The distance was too great, the risk too high. She barely knew him, had no reason to risk her dragons. She came, anyway. All 3 dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, flew north of the wall with Daenerys into the frozen waste, into weather no dragon had flown through in centuries. The cold was brutal. The wind threatened to throw them from the sky, but they kept flying. Following the pull, Daenerys felt the certainty that Jon needed her. They arrived at the frozen lake, like salvation from the sky. 3 dragons, diving through snow and wind. The whites looked up. The Night King looked up. For the first time in 8,000 years, dragons had come north of the wall. Drogon landed on the ice. Jon and his survivors ran for him, climbed onto his back. The whites attacked. Drogon burned them by the hundreds. Fire swept across the frozen lake. Whites fell burning. Others pressed forward, mindless and endless. Rhaegal and Viserion strafed the army from above. Dragon fire met the army of the dead, and for a moment it seemed like the living would win. Then the Night King bent down, picked up an ice spear from a dead giant. The spear was impossibly long, impossibly sharp, impossibly cold. He hefted it, took aim, threw. The spear flew through the air faster than any human could have thrown it, faster than the scorpion bolt that had wounded Drogon. It crossed hundreds of yards in a second, struck Viserion in the throat, just as the dragon was turning. Viserion screamed. The sound was terrible. Pain and confusion and betrayal. He had been born from stone in fire. had grown strong and beautiful, had learned to fly and hunt and trust. Now he was falling from the sky, with a spear of ice through his neck. He crashed through the frozen lake. Blood poured from the wound. His wings beat once, twice, stopped. His golden eyes dimmed. Viserion died in the freezing water, while his brothers circled above, roaring their grief. Daenerys felt it. The moment her child died, the bond severing, a part of her soul torn away. She screamed, tried to turn back, to recover his body, to do something. Jon held her back, told her they had to go, had to leave him. Staying meant they all died. Drogon flew south with the survivors clinging to his back. Rhaegal followed. Both dragons kept looking back, calling for their brother. He did not answer. Viserion was gone, the first dragon to die since the Dance of the Dragons over 100 years ago. But the Night King was not finished. He walked across the ice to where Viserion's body floated, placed his hand on the dragon's scales. The magic that created the White Walkers, that raised the dead, that had existed since the Age of Heroes, flowed into the dragon's corpse. Viserion's eye opened, not gold anymore. Blue, ice blue, the color of death and winter. He rose from the water, shook the ice from his wings, opened his jaws, and breathed not fire, but something else. Blue flame that froze instead of burning. Ice given form as flame, an abomination. The Night King climbed onto White Viserion's back. For the first time since the Age of Heroes, the army of the dead had a dragon. The balance had shifted. The living had lost their greatest advantage. The war had become something else entirely. When Daenerys learned that the Night King had raised Viserion, she did not cry, could not cry. The grief was too large, too absolute. Her child was not just dead. He had been turned into a weapon against everything he had protected, made into a slave, a monster. She swore then that she would kill the Night King. Not for the throne, not for Westeros, for Viserion, for her son who had been stolen and perverted. She would burn the Night King with dragonfire, would destroy him and his army, would free Viserion from whatever dark magic held him. And if she died doing it, so be it. Some things were worth dying for. This was one of them. The wall stood between the army of the dead and the Seven Kingdoms. Ancient magic, woven into its ice, had prevented the White Walkers from passing for 8,000 years. No army could break through, no magic could breach it. But they had a dragon now. The Night King rode White Viserion to the wall at Eastwatch by the sea. The dragon landed on the ice, walked forward until he stood before the ancient barrier. The Night King gave a silent command. Viserion opened his jaws. Blue fire erupted. Not heat, not light. Something that devoured both. The wall, which had stood for millennia, began to crack. Ice that had resisted every siege, every spell, every assault for 8,000 years, shattered under the concentrated blast. The foundations shook. The magic that bound the wall together, that kept the White Walkers at bay, broke. A section of the wall, hundreds of feet high and miles long, collapsed. Tons of ice crashed down. The sound could be heard for 100 miles. When the dust settled, there was a gap, a wound in the world's oldest defense. The army of the dead marched through. 100,000 whites, dozens of White Walkers, giants made of ice, spiders large as houses, and leading them all, a dead dragon with blue fire and a rider who had never been defeated. They were marching for Winterfell, for the living, for humanity itself. And Daenerys had 2 dragons left to stop them. The war for the Iron Throne was no longer the most important thing in the world. Survival was, and survival meant facing an enemy that could kill dragons, that could raise them from death. that had an entire species as weapons. Daenerys flew south with Jon Snow, the man who had convinced her to fight this war, the man who she realized she loved, the man who, unknown to either of them yet, shared her blood, her destiny, her doom. 2 dragons remained, Dorgan and Rhaegal, both grieving, both angry, both ready to face their undead brother in the sky, above Winterfell. The question was whether 2 living dragons could defeat 1 dead dragon and an army of the night, whether fire could defeat ice, whether Daenerys could save the world she wanted to rule. The answer would be written in the longest night Westeros had ever known, a night where dragons fought dragons in the darkness, where fire met ice, where the living made their last stand against the dead, and where Daenerys would learn that saving the world does not mean the world will love you for it. The preparations for the Battle of Winterfell were inadequate. Everyone knew it. Jon Snow assembled every available fighter, the North, the free folk, the Knights of the Vale. What remained of the Brotherhood without banners, Daenerys brought her unsullied, and Dothraki. Together they had perhaps 40,000 fighters, veterans and farm boys alike, all terrified. Against them came an army that numbered over 100,000, whites that felt no pain, no fear, no hesitation, white walkers that could shatter steel with a touch, giants, spiders, and white Viserion with the Night King riding him. The strategy was desperate. Use the dragons to eliminate the Night King. Without him the entire army would fall. The White Walkers were extensions of his power. The Whites were animated by his magic. Kill him and the war ended instantly. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. Daenerys would ride Drogon. Jon would ride Rhaegal. It was Jon's first time truly flying into combat. Rhaegal had accepted him, after some initial resistance. The dragon sensed something in Jon, a connection, a rightness. We would later learn why. Jon carried Targaryen blood. He was Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark, Daenerys' nephew, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. But neither of them knew this yet. Not fully, not in a way that mattered. 2 dragons versus 1, fire versus ice, the living versus the dead. The battle began at nightfall. The Dothraki charged first, their Arakas lit with magical fire, 40,000 horsemen galloping into the darkness. Their war cries echoed across the field. The flames on their weapons looked like a river of fire flowing toward the enemy. Then the flames started going out, one by one, hundreds, thousands. The Dothraki hit the army of the dead and simply disappeared. The screaming stopped. The fires vanished. Within minutes, the greatest cavalry force in the world was gone, dead or worse, raised to fight for the enemy. The Whites came next. A tide of corpses moving faster than any living army could. They crashed against Winterfell's defenses like waves against rocks. The living fought desperately. Fire worked. Dragonglass worked. Valyrian steel worked. But there were too many. Always too many. For every white destroyed, 3 more took its place. Daenerys and Jon launched into the air on their dragons. The plan was to patrol the skies, find the Night King, eliminate him before he could reach Bran, who was waiting in the Godswood as bait. Simple, direct. But a blizzard descended. Not natural, magical. Visibility dropped to nothing. Ice formed on the dragon's wings. The cold was brutal, even for creatures born in fire. They could barely see each other, could not see the ground, could not find the Night King. Then White Viserion appeared through the storm. He emerged from the clouds like a nightmare given form. His scales were white with frost. His eyes burned blue. The hole in his neck from the ice spear was still visible, black and frozen. He moved differently than living dragons, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. But he was fast, still strong, still deadly. The Night King sat on his back, untouched by the cold, waiting. Drogon saw his dead brother, and roared rage and grief, mixing into a sound that shook the air. Rhaegal answered, both living dragons dove at Viserion. This was personal. Their brother had been taken, corrupted, turned into a weapon against them. They would free him the only way they could, through death. The three dragons collided in midair. Drogon and Rhaegal attacked from opposite sides, trying to overwhelm Viserion through coordination. Claws raked scales, teeth snapped, wings tangled. They fell together, spinning, plummeting toward the ground before breaking apart and climbing again. Viserion fought differently than he had in life. More aggressive, more brutal. In life he had been gentle, playful. Now he was a weapon. He used his body as a battering ram, crashed into Rhaegal, using his superior mass, bit at Drogon's wings, trying to cripple him. The Night King threw ice spears whenever he had a clear shot. One nearly hit Daenerys, another tore through Drogon's wing membrane. The dragon kept flying, but the wound was serious. They could not sustain this, could not win a prolonged fight against Viserion, while the Night King had unlimited ammunition. Jon tried to position Rhaegal for a kill shot. Get above Viserion, come down on the Night King from behind. But Viserion was too fast, too unpredictable, and the blizzard made everything harder. They could barely see, could barely coordinate. The plan was falling apart. Below, the battle was going badly. The Whites had breached the first wall, were pouring into Winterfell's courtyard. The defenders were being pushed back, room by room, hallway by hallway. People were dying faster than they could count. The crypts, where women and children hid, proved to be a death trap. The dead Starks buried there rose as Whites and attacked the refugees. Daenerys made a decision. They could not kill the Night King in the air. They needed to ground him, force him to dismount. She dove Drogon toward the Gaunswood where Bran waited. Jon followed on Rhaegal. White Viserion pursued. Drogon landed in the courtyard. Daenerys dismounted. The Night King landed Viserion nearby. Drogon, seeing his undead brother on the ground, attacked with everything he had, breathed fire directly at Viserion's face. The undead dragon walked through the flames untouched. Ice and fire met, cancelled each other out. Viserion's blue fire shot back. Drogon dodged, but the courtyard filled with freezing flame. The Night King walked through the chaos toward Bran. Jon tried to stop him. Rhaegal tried to burn him. Nothing worked. The Night King could not be burned, could not be stopped by normal means. He raised his arms and every dead body in Winterfell rose. The Dothraki, who had died in the charge, the Unsullied who had fallen defending the walls, friends, family, allies, they all rose with blue eyes and turned on the living. It was over. The Night King had won. He approached Bran, drew his ice sword. This was the end of humanity, the end of the living, the end of everything. Then Arya Stark appeared from nowhere, leaped from the darkness, drove a Valyrian steel dagger into the Night King's chest. The ancient evil shattered into ice. Every White Walker exploded. Every White collapsed. White Viserion, mid-flight as he dove at Jon's and Rhaegal, simply stopped, fell from the sky, crashed into the courtyard, and shattered into frozen pieces. He died a second time, finally free, finally at peace. The battle was over. The living had won, but the cost was staggering. Half the defenders were dead. The Dothraki were gone. Most of the Unsullied were gone. Winterfell was destroyed. And while they had defeated the army of the dead, they still had to face Cersei in King's Landing. Daenerys looked at the survivors, looked at Jon, who the Northerners treated as a hero, looked at her remaining dragons. She had come to Westeros with 3 dragons and absolute confidence. Now she had 2 dragons and growing doubts. The North did not love her. They respected her dragons, feared them, but they did not love her. They loved Jon, trusted Jon, would follow Jon. Even though she was the queen, even though she had saved them, it was not enough. They marched south, an army broken and exhausted. Daenerys on Drogon, Jon on Rhaegal, 2 dragons flying over Westeros. The people below did not see saviors. They saw conquerors, foreign invaders with weapons of mass destruction. The dragons were wounded from the battle. Drogon's wing was torn. He flew with a limp. Rhaegal had taken damage to his body, deep gashes that had not fully healed. Both dragons needed rest, needed time, but there was no time. Cersei would not wait. The realm would not wait. They approached Dragonstone to resupply and plan. The fleet sailed below. Rhaegal flew alongside Drogon, weaker than his brother, still recovering, still grieving Viserion. Euron Greyjoy's fleet was hidden behind the rocks near Dragonstone. Qyburn had provided them with dozens of scorpions, ship-mounted, each one manned by experienced sailors. They had been practicing, waiting, preparing for this exact moment. The Iron Fleet appeared from behind the island. Euron gave the order. All scorpions fired at once. Dozens of massive bolts shot through the air, all aimed at the dragons. Drogon saw them coming, dodged. Daenerys pulled him into a tight turn. The bolts missed, barely, but Rhaegal, wounded and slower, could not dodge fast enough. The first bolt hit him in the chest. Rhaegal roared. The second bolt hit his wing. The third hit his neck. 3 hits in 3 seconds. The bolts were enormous, designed to pierce dragon scales, designed to kill. Rhaegal fell from the sky. Jon was not riding him. Rhaegal was alone, dying. He hit the water hard, tried to keep flying, tried to rise, could not. The wounds were too severe. His wing was destroyed. His neck was torn open. Blood poured into the sea. Rhaegal looked up at Drogon, one last time. His brother, his last living brother. Then his eyes closed. Rhaegal, named for the prince who should have been king, died in the water off Dragonstone. Daenerys screamed, another child dead, another part of her soul torn away. She had 3 dragons when she arrived in Westeros. Now she had 1. Viserion killed by the Night King. Rhaegal killed by Euron. Drogon was all that remained. The largest, strongest, most aggressive dragon. The one who had never left her, who had saved her in the fighting pits, who had burned the Lannister army, who had fought the dead and lived. Drogon was the last dragon in the world, the last connection to the species that had ruled for 5,000 years, and Daenerys had lost everything else. Her children, her closest advisors, her armies were depleted. The North did not love her. Westeros did not want her. Jon Snow had a better claim to the throne. Everywhere she looked, she saw rejection, betrayal, loss. She looked at King's Landing in the distance, the city where her father had died, where Robert Baratheon had stolen her family's throne, where Cersei sat in defiance, where scorpions lined the walls waiting to kill Drogon. Something changed in her then, hardened. She had tried to be good, tried to be loved, tried to break the wheel gently. It had gained her nothing but death and grief. Perhaps her father had been right all along. Perhaps fire and blood was not a curse, but a necessity. She had 1 dragon left, 1 weapon, 1 chance to take what was hers, and she would not hesitate, would not show mercy, would not give anyone another opportunity to kill what she loved. King's Landing had scorpions, had walls, had 1,000,000 people. She had Drogon, and Drogon was more than enough. The bells would ring. The city would surrender. and Daenerys would decide whether surrender was enough, whether mercy was weakness, whether burning a city was justice or madness. Rhaegal's death was the final crack in whatever restraint she had left, the final loss that pushed her past caring about being loved. She would be feared instead, and the entire world would learn what happened when you killed a dragon queen's children. One dragon remained, one queen remained, one city stood between Daenerys and the throne, and after the bells rang, that city would burn until nothing remained but ash and memory. The armies gathered before King's Landing. Daenerys had fewer than 30,000 soldiers, depleted, exhausted, veterans of the Battle of Winterfell, who had barely recovered. The Asay had the Golden Company, the Lannister forces, the City Watch, and Scorpions, hundreds of them, mounted on every wall, every tower, every rooftop. Tyrion believed negotiation was still possible. He convinced Daenerys to give Cersei one chance to surrender, to ring the bells, to open the gates and end this without further bloodshed. If Cersei surrendered, the city would be spared, the people would live, mercy would be shown. Daenerys agreed, but her eyes were empty when she said it. Something in her had broken. Missandei, her closest friend, had been captured and executed by Cersei, beheaded in front of her, while she watched helplessly from a distance. Missandei's last word was Dracarys, fire. Daenerys heard that word and understood what her friend was telling her. Burn them all. The battle began at dawn. Drogon approached from the water, flying low, fast. The Scorpions tracked him, fired. Euron had hit Rhaegal easily from ambush, but Drogon was not ambushed, was not wounded, was not caught off guard. He dodged every bolt. His speed was incredible, his maneuvers impossible. He would dive toward the water, then climb vertically. Bank hard left, then spiral right. The Scorpion operators could not keep up, could not predict his movements. Bolt after bolt missed. Then Drogon began destroying the Scorpions, one by one, methodically. He would fly past a wall and breathe fire. The Scorpion would melt, the operators would burn. He would move to the next, then the next. Within an hour, every Scorpion in King's Landing was destroyed or abandoned. The city's defense was gone. The Golden Company stood at the gates, 20,000 professional soldiers, the best money could buy. They held their formations, prepared to fight. Drogon flew over them once, opened his jaws. The entire front line disappeared in flames. The survivors broke, ran. The Golden Company, legendary for never breaking a contract, rooted without landing a single blow. The city gates exploded under dragonfire. Daenerys' forces poured through, the Lannister soldiers, seeing their defenses destroyed and a dragon burning everything, threw down their weapons, surrendered. The Northmen stopped fighting, waited. It was over. The bells began to ring. Every bell in King's Landing, the great bell in the sept, the bells in the towers, the bells on the walls, all of them ringing surrender. The universal signal that the city yielded, that the battle was done, that mercy was requested. Daenerys sat on Drogon's back, hovering above the city. She heard the bells, understood what they meant. She had won. The city was hers. The throne was hers. Everything she had fought for was finally within her grasp. She looked down at King's Landing, the city where her family had ruled for 300 years, where her father had died, screaming, "Burn them all," where her brother Rhaegar had left to fight Robert Baratheon and never returned, where generations of Targaryens had sat the Iron Throne. The people in the streets were terrified, looking up at the dragon. At her. She had freed slaves in Essos, broken chains, been called mother, Misa, loved. Here she was feared, hated, foreign, dragon queen, conqueror, tyrant. She had lost Viserion, lost Rhaegal, lost Jorah, lost Missandei, lost the love of the North, lost Jorah's love when he learned they were related, lost everything except Drogon and the throne she had come to claim. And she realized something. She would never be loved here, never be accepted, never be anything except feared. So she made a choice. If fear was all she would have, then fear would be enough. Let it be fear. Daenerys nudged Drogon forward. The dragon obeyed. They flew toward the Red Keep, where Cersei watched from the tower. But they did not go there directly. Instead, Drogon began burning. Street by street, building by building, people ran screaming. Soldiers who had surrendered burned where they stood. Women carrying children burned. Elderly men burned. The city that had rung its bells in surrender burned anyway. Jon Snow, standing in the streets with the Northmen, watched in horror. This was not battle, not war. This was massacre. He shouted for his men to fall back, to stop fighting. But the Dothraki and Unsullied, following their queen's lead, began killing everyone they found, soldier or civilian. It did not matter anymore. Drogon flew in a pattern, starting from the walls, moving inward, burning everything. His fire was so hot that stone melted, buildings collapsed, the streets became rivers of fire. People trapped in their homes burned alive. Those who fled into the streets were incinerated. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Drogon was everywhere. The destruction was systematic, methodical. This was not rage, not madness. This was decision, choice. Daenerys guided Drogon to ensure every district burned, that no section of the city was spared. She was erasing King's Landing, remaking it in fire, teaching Westeros what happened when you rejected a dragon queen. The Sept of Baelor exploded when Drogon's fire ignited the wildfire caches hidden beneath it. The green flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion could be heard for miles. Thousands died instantly. The wildfire spread through the sewers, ignited more caches, more explosions. The city was destroying itself now. Drogon had lit the spark. The wildfire did the rest. Cersei watched from the Red Keep as her city died. She had been so confident, so certain her scorpions would work, that the Golden Company would fight, that Daenerys could be beaten. Now she understood. There was no beating a dragon, there was only surviving one, and she would not survive this. Daenerys finally turned toward the Red Keep. Drogon flew directly at it. Cersei ran down the stairs, through the corridors, trying to reach the escape tunnels, trying to survive. Drogon back for her, found her in the chaos. Brother and sister, lover and lover, they held each other as the castle collapsed around them. Drogon tore through the Red Keep. His fire melted the towers. The walls cracked. The foundations shook. The castle that had stood for 300 years, built by Aegon the Conqueror, destroyed by his descendant, poetic, tragic, inevitable. Cersei and Jaime died together in the tunnels beneath the Red Keep, crushed by falling stone. The arrogant queen and the Kingslayer killed not by enemies, but by the weight of their own castle falling on them. The burning continued for hours. By the time Drogon landed, King's Landing was gone, not conquered, erased. Over 1 million people lived in King's Landing before the bells rang. Perhaps half survived. The rest were ash. Bodies lined the streets. The smell was unbearable. The smoke could be seen from Winterfell. Daenerys dismounted from Drogon and walked through the ruins. Ash fell like snow, gray and soft, covering everything. She looked at what she had done and felt no regret, only certainty. This was necessary. This was justice. They had rejected her, killed her children, plotted against her. This was what they deserved. She gave a speech to her surviving forces, told them they had liberated King's Landing, that they would liberate all of Westeros next. Then the world, they would break every wheel, free every slave, burn every master. She was not finished. This was only the beginning. Her soldiers cheered, the Unsullied who had followed her from slavery to freedom, the Dothraki who had crossed the sea for her. They believed, they followed, they would burn the world if she commanded it. But Jon Snow heard the speech and understood this would not stop. Daenerys had become what she fought against, a tyrant with absolute power who believed her cause justified any atrocity. She would burn city after city, kingdom after kingdom, and call it liberation. He loved her. Part of him still did. But he loved the realm more, loved the innocent people who would burn next, loved the idea of a world where power did not mean the right to kill anyone who disagreed with you. Tyrion found him that night. The dwarf had seen what Daenerys had done, had watched the woman he advised, believed in, supported, commit the worst massacre in living memory. He told Jon what everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to say. She had to be stopped, and there was only one person she might allow close enough to do it. Jon resisted, made excuses. She had lost so much, been betrayed so many times. The throne had driven her to this. Once she had what she wanted, she would be different, better. The woman he loved would return. Tyrion asked him a simple question. Would you have done this? Would any good person have done this? The city surrendered. She burned it anyway. That was not grief or madness or stress. That was choice. And she would make that choice again and again until someone stopped her. Jon knew Tyrion was right, hated that he was right, but could not escape the truth. The woman who walked out of the fire in the Dothraki Sea with 3 dragons had promised to break the wheel, to build something better. Somewhere along the way she had decided that breaking the wheel meant burning everyone who stood in her path, and her path now led everywhere. He went to the throne room the next day, the room where generations of Targaryens had ruled, where the Iron Throne sat waiting for its next occupant. Drogon had melted parts of the walls, but the throne remained untouched, waiting. Daenerys was there, standing before the throne, not sitting on it yet, just looking at it, the thing she had wanted her entire life, the symbol of everything her family had lost, finally hers. She heard Jon enter, turned, smiled. For a moment, she looked like the girl she had been before the dragons, before the war, before she learned that power came with a price she was willing to pay. She told him they would build a new world together, rule together, rule together. She understood now why the throne had 300 swords, why Aegon had made it uncomfortable, because ruling meant making hard choices. Burning cities was hard. Killing innocents was hard, but necessary. They would do what was necessary, together. Jon walked toward her. Every step was agony. He loved her, had fought for her, had bent the knee to her, had given up his claim to support hers. And now he had to do the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than dying at the wall, harder than fighting the Night King, harder than anything. He told her she would always be his queen, meant it. She smiled, believed him, trusted him completely. Why would she not? He had never lied to her, never betrayed her. He was the one person she thought she could trust absolutely. He kissed her. She kissed back. For a moment they were just 2 people who loved each other, who had fought together, won together. Then Jon pulled the dagger from his belt, held her close so she would not see it coming, would not suffer, would not be afraid, and he drove it into her heart. Daenerys gasped, looked down at the blade, up at Jon. Her expression was not anger, not hate, just confusion, betrayal. She had trusted him, loved him, and he had killed her. She did not understand. could not understand. In her mind, everything she had done was right, necessary, just she died in his arms. The last Targaryen, the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, the woman who had freed slaves and conquered cities and brought dragons back from extinction, dead on the floor of the throne room, murdered by the man who loved her, the man she loved. Drogon knew immediately. The bond between dragon and rider transcended distance. He was outside the city, heard her death, felt it. The last connection to the woman who had birthed him from stone snapped like a breaking chain. He came. The walls of the throne room exploded inward. Drogon crashed through stone and steel, landed in the ruins, saw Daenerys's body, saw Jon standing over her, understood what had happened. Jon did not run, did not try to defend himself. He stood there waiting for the fire, deserving it, ready for it. He had killed the woman he loved, had become a queenslayer, a kinslayer, a kinslayer. The Honorable Jon Snow had committed murder. If Drogon burned him, it would be justice. Drogon opened his jaws. Fire gathered in his throat. Drogon closed his eyes. But the fire did not come for him. Drogon turned toward the Iron Throne, the symbol of everything, the reason his mother had crossed the sea, the reason she had fought and killed and died, the thing that had corrupted her, changed her, destroyed her. He unleashed his fire on the throne. The heat was incredible. The throne, forged by Balerion's fire 300 years ago, melted under Drogon's flames. The swords fused together, liquefied, ran like water across the floor. The throne became slag, molten metal, nothing. Drogon had destroyed the Iron Throne, the seat of power that had caused so much death, so many wars, so much suffering, created by a dragon, destroyed by a dragon, the circle complete. Then Drogon did something no dragon had ever done. He picked up Daenerys's body gently in his claws, held her like she was sleeping, like she would wake up if he was careful enough. He looked at Jon one last time, not with hate, not with anger, with something that might have been understanding, or grief, or both. Then he launched into the air, flew through the hole he had made in the wall, climbed into the sky above King's Landing, circled once, and flew east. People reported seeing him for days afterward, flying toward the narrow sea. Some claimed he was heading for Valyria, the ruins where dragons had been born, where his species had originated. Perhaps he would take Daenerys there, to the homeland she had never seen, to rest among the ashes of her ancestors. Others said he flew toward Ashai, the Shadowlands beyond the edge of the world, where magic still existed, where maybe impossibly someone could bring her back, where dragons might still live in the far mountains, and he could find others of his kind. The truth is, nobody knows where Drogon went. He was seen flying east for several days. Then the sightings stopped. The last dragon in the world disappeared, carrying the last Targaryen, both gone, both legends now rather than reality. Jon Snow was arrested, tried for murder. The lords of Westeros gathered to decide his fate. He offered no defense, said he deserved death, was ready for it. But his sentence was different: exile to the Night's Watch, to the wall he had served once before, to spend his life guarding the realm from threats beyond. It was not death, but it was close enough. Jon Snow, who had been king in the north, who had fought the dead, who had killed a queen, went back to the wall, back to where his story began, the circle closing for him as it had for the dragons. Bran Stark, the boy who had been pushed from a tower and learned to see through time, became king, not through conquest or inheritance, through choice. The lords elected him, a broken king for a broken realm. He would rule not through fear or love, but through wisdom, or so they hoped. Sansa Stark took the North out of the Seven Kingdoms, made it independent again as it had been before Aegon's conquest. The North remembers, and what they remembered was that dragons had forced them to kneel 300 years ago. Now the dragons were gone. They would kneel to no one. The wheel Daenerys wanted to break had broken, but not the way she intended. The system of absolute monarchy, enforced by dragons, was over. Something new would rise, something different. Whether better or worse, only time would tell. King's Landing began to rebuild. The dead were burned, the rubble was cleared. Life continued because life always continues. The survivors mourned, remembered, and slowly began to forget, as humans always do. Stories spread about what happened. Some said Daenerys went mad, that the Targaryen madness finally claimed her. Fire and blood in her veins. Others said she was always destined for this, that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that anyone with a dragon would eventually use it. Some claimed she was a hero who went too far, who meant well, but lost herself along the way. Others said she was a villain from the start, that freeing slaves in Essos was just practice for conquering Westeros, that the signs were always there, if people had looked. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Daenerys Targaryen was a girl sold into slavery, who freed herself and others, who brought extinct creatures back to life through sacrifice and will, who fought armies of the dead to save humanity, and who burned a city of innocents when that humanity rejected her. She was not mad. She was powerful, and power revealed what was always inside her. The capacity for great good and great evil, the ability to free slaves and burn children, to be loved and feared, to be hero and monster. The dragons were gone now, all of them. Balerion raised and destroyed by the Night King. Rhaegal shot from the sky by Euron Greyjoy. Drogon disappeared with his mother's corpse. The age of dragons, which had begun 5,000 years ago in Valyria, was over. The skulls beneath the Red Keep had been destroyed when the castle collapsed. The books that detailed how to care for dragons were lost. The knowledge of how to hatch them gone with Daenerys. The species was extinct again, this time perhaps permanently. And the world moved on, built new things, told new stories. The children born after the burning would know dragons only as legends, as warnings, as symbols of what happens when too much power rests in too few hands, whether those hands held swords or crowns or dragons. 300 years ago, Aegon Targaryen had stood on a hill and decided to conquer Westeros with 3 dragons. He succeeded, built a dynasty, changed the world. 300 years later, Daenerys Targaryen stood in a ruined city, having conquered Westeros with 1 dragon and lost everything. The dragons had come full circle, from Valyria to Westeros, from 3 to 20 to 3 again, from weapons of conquest to tools of liberation to instruments of destruction. They had built empires and torn them down, saved the world and nearly destroyed it. And in the end, they left only questions. Were they necessary? Were they worth the cost? Should they return if they could? Would humanity make the same mistakes, learn the same lessons, repeat the same cycles? Nobody knew. But as ash fell on King's Landing like snow and the last dragon flew into legend, one thing was certain: the world had changed. Again, as it always did when dragons were involved. And somewhere far to the east, beyond the maps, beyond the known world, Drogon landed on a mountain peak. He laid Daenerys' body down gently, sat beside her, and waited for what even he did not know. Perhaps for the magic to return, for her to wake, for the world to make sense again, or perhaps just to grieve, because dragons, for all their power and fire and fury, understand loss, understand love, understand that some bonds transcend death and species and logic. The last dragon sat on a mountain guarding the last Targaryen, and the sun set on the Age of Dragons for the second time in history. Whether it would rise again, only time and fate could tell. But for now the story was over. The fire had burned out, the blood had been spilled, the wheel had broken, and the world learned to live without dragons once more. 400 years of dragon history, from the volcanic peaks of Valyria to the frozen wastes beyond the wall to the burning streets of King's Landing, we have witnessed the complete cycle: birth, dominance, extinction, rebirth, extinction again. The story of dragons is the story of power itself, and power, as we have seen, never ends well. Let us count the cost. Over 30 named dragons across Westerosi history. Balerion the Black Dread, who melted castles and forged thrones. Rhaegar, who fought in 2 major wars and lived nearly 2 centuries. Meraxes, who died in Dawn, proving dragons could be killed. The generations born after the conquest who multiplied and thrived. The wild dragons of Dragonstone, who answered to no one. The dance dragons, who killed each other in civil war. The sickly hatchlings, who represented extinction. And finally Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, the last 3. Every single one is dead or disappeared. The species that had dominated for 5,000 years is gone. Again. But this time, the extinction feels more permanent, more final. Because this time, the knowledge of how to bring them back died with Daenerys. The Valyrians had rituals, blood magic, ancient spells that bonded dragon to rider and ensured healthy breeding. The Targaryens inherited fragments of that knowledge, enough to maintain dragons for a century after the conquest. But the full understanding was lost in the doom. What remained degraded with each generation, until even keeping dragons alive became impossible. Daenerys brought them back through sacrifice, through death, paying for life, through walking into fire and emerging reborn. It was not science or planning, it was magic, instinct, destiny perhaps, and it cannot be repeated. Nobody knows the exact conditions, the precise cost, the specific ritual. 3 eggs turned to stone, a funeral pyre, a witch burned alive, an unborn child already dead, a grieving woman walking into flames. These elements combined in a way nobody understands to hatch 3 dragons. You cannot deliberately recreate an accident, cannot force magic to obey rules. It never followed. So the dragons are truly gone now. Unless Drogon lives still in some distant land, unless he finds others of his kind somehow preserved in places beyond human knowledge, unless the eggs Daenerys left behind in Meereen somehow survive and somebody discovers how to hatch them, unless magic works in ways we do not comprehend and dragons can return simply because the world needs them. These are possibilities, not probabilities. The realistic answer is that dragons are extinct, that Drogon, if he lives, is the last, that when he dies, the species dies with him, that 300 years from now, people will debate whether dragons ever truly existed, whether the skulls are elaborate fakes, whether the histories are exaggerations, whether Daenerys Targaryen was real or mythical. But while the species may be gone, the legacy remains. Dragons changed Westeros permanently. They unified 7 independent kingdoms into one realm, created a dynasty that ruled for 3 centuries, established the idea that power flows from force rather than consent, built King's Landing, forged the Iron Throne, shaped the politics and culture and identity of every person in the 7 kingdoms. Without dragons, would Aegon have conquered anything? Would House Targaryen be remembered as anything except a minor noble family that fled Valyria and settled on a dreary island? Would Westeros have unified eventually through diplomacy or stayed forever divided? These questions matter because they tell us what dragons truly represented. They were not just animals or weapons, they were the physical manifestation of power inequality. One person on a dragon could defeat 10,000 soldiers, could burn castles that took generations to build, could enforce laws that nobody wanted, could rule through fear when love was impossible. Dragons made democracy impossible, made negotiation pointless, made resistance suicidal. They were the ultimate argument, the final word, agree or burn. And yet, they also saved humanity. When the Night King marched south with his army of the dead, conventional weapons were useless. Swords and arrows could not stop 100,000 wights and ice demons. Only dragons could fight on that scale. Only dragon fire could kill in those numbers. Without Drogon and Rhaegal fighting at Winterfell, the living would have lost. The world would have ended. So were dragons good or evil? Necessary or catastrophic? The answer is both. They were tools, and tools are only as good or evil as those who wield them. Aegon used dragons to unite kingdoms and end constant warfare. His descendants used them to enforce unjust laws and maintain power. Daenerys used them to free slaves and fight the dead. Then she used them to burn innocents. The same creature, the same fire, different purposes, different outcomes. This is why the story of dragons matters, because it is not really about dragons, it is about power, about what happens when some people have overwhelming advantages over others, about how good intentions curdle when backed by force, about how fear and love are not opposite ends of a spectrum, but intertwined states that feed on each other. Daenerys wanted to be loved. When she could not have love, she chose fear. But fear does not last. Fear breeds resentment. Resentment breeds rebellion. And rebellion overthrows even dragon queens. Her story is a warning that power without legitimacy is unstable, that you cannot burn your way to respect, that being right does not give you the right to kill those who disagree. The Dance of the Dragons taught a different lesson, that even when everyone has dragons, nobody wins, that mutual assured destruction is not a strategy, that civil wars fought with superweapons destroy everything including the weapons themselves. 16 dragons died killing each other, and the humans who rode them. The Targaryen dynasty never recovered. The species nearly went extinct, all because two sides had equal power and chose to use it. These lessons apply beyond dragons. Nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, biological warfare, any technology that gives enormous power to small groups creates the same dilemma. Use it and face catastrophic consequences. Do not use it and watch someone else use it against you. The only winning move is not having the technology at all, but once it exists, that option disappears. Dragons existed, cannot be unmade from history. The question is what humanity learned from them. Did Westeros become better after dragons disappeared? Did the transition from absolute monarchy to elected kingship happen because dragons were no longer there to enforce tyranny? Would democracy ever emerge while one family could threaten to burn any rebellion? The evidence suggests dragons prevented progress, that their absence allowed new systems to develop, that breaking the wheel required first breaking the creature that enforced the wheel. Daenerys was right about the wheel, wrong about how to break it. You cannot build a better world by burning the old one when people are still living in it. But there is another side to this. Without dragons, humanity was vulnerable. The White Walkers proved that when existential threats emerge, conventional power is insufficient. Sometimes you need overwhelming force. Sometimes you need the nuclear option. Sometimes you need dragons. The paradox is perfect. Dragons are necessary for survival, but incompatible with justice. Essential for defense but corrupting to society. Needed in crisis but dangerous in peace. There is no answer, no solution, no way to have the benefits without the costs. Perhaps that is why dragons keep going extinct, why they return only in times of great need and disappear when that need ends, why they exist at the edges of history rather than the center. They are not meant to be permanent, not meant to be normal. They are crisis creatures, apocalypse weapons, tools for reshaping the world that cannot exist in a shaped world. Drogon understood this perhaps. When he melted the Iron Throne, he was not acting on instinct or rage. He was removing the object that had killed his mother, not Jon Snow, not the dagger, the throne itself, the seat of power that had corrupted everyone who touched it, that had turned a girl who freed slaves into a woman who burned cities, that had caused the dance and doomed his species twice. By destroying the throne, Drogon ended the game, removed the prize, made the war pointless. It was the most intelligent thing any dragon ever did, and then he left, took his mother, and disappeared, removed himself from the equation, refused to be a weapon anymore. If Drogon still lives somewhere beyond the maps, he is the last dragon by choice. He could have stayed, could have accepted Jon or someone else as a rider, could have enforced whatever new government emerged, could have continued the cycle. Instead, he left, broke the pattern, chose extinction over continuation. That might be the most important lesson in 400 years of dragon history. That knowing when to leave is wiser than knowing when to fight. That some cycles need to be broken even if breaking them means losing everything. That power unused is sometimes more valuable than power exercised. The dragons are gone. The throne is melted. The wheel is broken. Westeros must now figure out how to govern without the threat of fire from above. How to maintain unity without dragons to enforce it. How to solve disputes without one side having overwhelming advantage. It will be messy, imperfect, slow, but perhaps better, perhaps more just, perhaps more human. And if threats emerge that require dragons, if another long night comes, if humanity faces extinction again, then perhaps the eggs will hatch, perhaps Drogon will return, perhaps magic will provide what is needed when it is needed, or perhaps humanity will have to solve its problems without Deus Ex Machina, without dragon queens to save or burn them, without ancient weapons to rely on. That is the world Daenerys left behind, saved from the dead, traumatized by fire, changed forever. Better or worse, depending on who you ask, but changed, and change was what she wanted. She said she would break the wheel. She did, just not how she intended, not how anyone could have predicted. Through sacrifice and fire, and death and loss, and ultimately through her own fall. 400 years. 5,000 if you count from Valyria. Dozens of dragons, hundreds of riders, millions of lives changed. Entire civilizations built and destroyed. All of it leading to one moment. A dragon melting a throne. A woman dying betrayed. A species disappearing again. An age ending. Was it worth it? Did the dragons contribute more than they destroyed? Would Westeros be better if Aegon had never conquered? If Daenerys had never hatched those eggs? If dragons had stayed extinct after the dance? There is no answer, but there is a story. The greatest story in Westerosi history, from Balerion to Drogon, from Aegon to Daenerys, from conquest to liberation to devastation, from 3 dragons to 20 to 3 again, from Valyria to Westeros and back to legends. The fire has gone out, the blood has dried, the wheel has broken, and in the silence left behind, humanity must figure out what comes next, without dragons to guide them, to protect them, to threaten them, to save them, just humans trying to build something better from the ashes of what was. Perhaps that was always the point, that dragons were never meant to be permanent, that they existed to force change when change was needed, to break systems that had calcified, to end eras that had lasted too long, to remind humanity that nothing lasts forever, not even power that seems absolute. The age of dragons is over. Long live the age of dragons, because even in their absence, they shape everything. Every decision made in Westeros happens in the shadow of what dragons did, what they might do again, what they represent. Power and destruction and salvation and doom, all combined into creatures that never should have existed, but did. And somewhere far to the east, on a mountain peak beyond any map, a dragon sits beside a body that will never wake, the last of his kind, waiting for something that will never come. Grieving for a woman who loved him and used him and died because of choices both made. He spreads his wings occasionally, roars at the sky, breathes fire at nothing, and waits for the world to need dragons again, for magic to return, for someone to find him and realize what was lost, or simply for time to pass, and for his long life to finally end, whichever comes first. The last dragon, the last Targaryen, the last remnant of an age that changed the world and then ended in fire and blood, as all ages of dragons do. As all ages of dragons must.